Chapter 404. Is your name Guhan, or military governor? As soon as Guhan entered the combat room, Ice, who was lying on the ground, stared at him with her bare eyes. My name is Guhan. Guhan answered very straightforwardly. Very good, Guhan. I didn't think we would meet again. Ice kept rubbing her paws on the ground, as if trying to sharpen her claws. I understand now. The source of all my sufferings came from you. Without you, I would have killed Yi Qing with my claws. I wouldn't have to suffer so much. All of this is because of you. Ice kept rubbing her paws against the ground, as if she was trying to sharpen her claws. I can understand your pain, Ice, but I don't know what you're talking about. If you want to take revenge on me, shouldn't you at least tell me what I've done to you? Guhan said innocently. Ice was not like Yi Tian. After Zhe Jendi became Jendi, she was not used by Zhe Tian Jendi again. She knew nothing about Zhe Tian Jendi. Moreover, Yi Tian's memory seemed to have been tampered with by someone. Many key memories were removed. In addition, Yi Tian had been hiding things from Guhan. She did not mention anything about Zhe Tian Jendi, so Guhan could not find out the truth from Yi Tian. Now that Ice had suddenly appeared, if what happened in the dungeon was real, then Ice should have spent her whole life with Zhe Tian Jendi. More importantly, Ice seemed to know Guhan, and even called out the name military governor. This meant that Ice had definitely interacted with Guhan before, and had a deep relationship with him. Otherwise, she would not know the real identity of the military governor, which Liuyan Ling and Song Yifei had not told him. So Guhan planned to get information from Ice about what happened between him and Zhe Tian Jendi. He wanted to know why Zhe Tian Jendi would leave so many backups for him. These backups were too precious for Guhan. You don't know? Ice smiled. Of course you don't know. You haven't met that person yet. When you meet that person, you will understand. Who is that person? Why will I understand everything when I meet him? Guhan asked. I can't tell you. Just like how I really want to kill you now, but I can't. Ice snorted, then moved her body backward, revealing a circular entrance. Go in. Behind this entrance is the final destination. Go in and take those damn things, then I will be free. I can go in directly. Shouldn't I defeat you first? Guhan asked curiously. Do you really think you can defeat me? Ice rolled her eyes at Guhan. You can't defeat me now. There are hundreds of people in the trial formation, and none of them can defeat me. I don't want to be trapped in this formation for the rest of my life. Since you and I are old friends, and the things inside were originally left for you, you can take them. It will save me trouble. Thank you. Although he didn't ask Ice about sky covering Jendi, being able to enter the final destination without fighting was already the best result. Guhan knew that even if he used all his trump cards, he might not be able to defeat this former god, universe-level Yuan Ku. The current meteor-level Yuan Ku was Ice's opponent. She was really too strong. The difference between her and Guhan couldn't be made up with sword skills or swordsmanship. Let's go. I can't accept a thank you from you. Ice laid on the ground, as if she had completely lost the desire to make things difficult for Guhan. Guhan still cupped his fists in front of Ice and strode towards the entrance. Victory seemed to be within reach. It's been so long. I wonder how Guhan is doing. Can he succeed? Outside Ice's room, Liuyan Ling and Song Yifei were waiting for the final result. However, their states were different. Song Yifei was very anxious, but Liuyan Ling was very calm. As Song Yifei said this, he was lying outside Ice's room, trying to see the situation inside through the translucent wall. He wanted to see how Guhan was fighting. Unfortunately, it was all in vain. Although the wall was translucent, the scene inside was completely blurry. He could only see a bit of black light and nothing else. It was impossible to know how Guhan was doing inside. There's nothing to be anxious about. Guhan definitely won't be able to get through. Seeing Song Yifei's peeping look, Liuyan Ling sneered. I can't even get through. If she gets through, where will the face of the fleeting time family go? But what if Guhan gets through? Song Yifei was unconvinced. I think Guhan is more powerful than you. If you can't get through, Why can't Guhan? Who said he's more powerful than me? Liuyan Ling seemed to be angry. As long as I use the billion swords tactic, Guhan will have to hide far away. I can beat him however I want and bully him however I want. As she said this, Liuyan Ling waved her arm as if she was cutting something. Just like this, I'll cut all his clothes into noodles and shave his head. From the inside to the outside, from top to bottom. I'll shave all his hair. All the hair was shaved. What kind of hair was all his hair? Liuyan Ling's words were very imaginative. Hey, the words of the people from the Fleeting Time family are so disgusting. How did the Fleeting Time family become the top family in the world? Song Ifei said disdainfully. Just pretend I didn't say that. Liuyan Ling decisively gave in. If this sentence was spread, then her reputation as Liuyan Ling would be greatly ruined. She was the goddess in the eyes of many people from the Yangjing city's families. How could she ruin her own image? No. I'll say it. I'll let everyone know your true colors, Liuyan Ling. The two of them played around the topic of confidentiality. It couldn't be helped. There was no entertainment in the room. Apart from the two of them fooling around, there was nothing else to do. Just as the two of them were fooling around, a male version of the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor's voice suddenly sounded in the room. The trial taker has failed and has now retreated 200 steps. The next challenger can enter the room to continue the challenge. See, I told you he's definitely going to fail. Liuyan Ling acted as if she already knew, but there was still a hint of loneliness and regret on her face. Guhan had also failed. Could there really be anyone in this trial who could defeat the female bear? I can't believe I was tricked by a bear. Reappearing in an unfamiliar room, Guhan's face was filled with bitterness. Just as he was about to enter the entrance, the bear that was lying on the ground suddenly appeared before him. Before he could even pull out his heaven-reliant sword, the bear had already sat on his waist. His entire body was suppressed by a weight that felt as heavy as 1,000 catties. His cold hands were bound by an invisible power, making it impossible for him to even touch his heaven-reliant sword. Ha 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 ha. Military governor, you didn't expect such a day would come, did you? Even I, Ice-Eyes, have tricked you. Ice-Eyes, who was sitting on Guhan, laughed like crazy. Her 4 short bear paws kept moving up and down, and she looked like she was about to fly. She was too happy, so happy that tears were coming out of her eyes from laughing. At this time, Ice-Eyes was similar to Monkey Sun back then. Monkey Sun had been suppressed under the Five-Finger Mountain for 500 years. Once he came out, the anger that had been suppressed for 500 years burst out. In fact, this Ice-Eyes was even more pitiful than Monkey Sunday. Monkey Sun had only been suppressed for 500 years, but she had been suppressed for more than 700 years. Military governor, I've recorded everything clearly. You've tricked me 321 times in total, and in the end, you even tricked me here and imprisoned me for 700 years. Military governor, even you have been tricked by me. Wahahaha, why do I feel so good? I feel so good that I'm about to cry. I really want to find someone to have sex with. Ha 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 ha. It seemed that Ice-Eyes really felt good. You idiot, military governor. How could I let you in just like that? Don't even think about getting a single good thing in here. As long as I, Ice-Eyes, am here, don't even think about entering the finish line. So what if I can't get out? Anyway, I've been imprisoned here for more than 700 years. I don't care if I have another 700 years. At most, I'll play fight the landlord alone. Let me tell you, I've already mastered the method of doing 3 things at once. Each of my hearts can play cards independently, and I will never secretly look at my cards. Forget it. Mastering 3 things at once just to play fight the landlord. How dare this female bear say that she wasn't bored and didn't want to go out? It seemed like her hatred for Jiyu Han had already surpassed her hatred for loneliness. Ah, this is too good. This is too good. This deity has never felt so good in her life. These 700 years are worth it. Ice-Eyes still couldn't control the smile on her face. She was too happy. Wait for me to hold my breath. Then, I'll fart on this guy's head and teach him an unforgettable lesson. Ice-Eyes came up with such a despicable and dirty idea. Then, just as she was about to hold her breath, she suddenly fell to the ground. Hey, where's that guy? Ice Eyes looked around blankly and found no trace of Guhan. F***ck, this guy actually admitted defeat. Chapter 405. Did I lose? Guhan, who had escaped from Ice Eye's spear but by admitting defeat, looked helplessly at his empty palm. This feeling made Guhan very uncomfortable. If he had lost due to a lack of skill after a big battle, then Guhan would have nothing to say. However, this kind of loss due to the suppression of absolute strength made Guhan very unwilling. I don't need to be at the spiritual sword level. Even if I have the strength of a famous sword level, I can still fight with that stupid bear, Guhan muttered to himself. The gap of 2 realms was really too big. Even with Ice Eye's huge body size, her movement was still completely beyond Guhan's reaction time, so Guhan did not even have time to pull out the sword lady to fight. She directly controlled Guhan in her hands. Suddenly, a voice came from Guhan's side, Mr. Guhan, don't worry. After all, that stupid bear Ice Eyes is the only one among the 3 of us who has recovered a bit of strength. You are only a treasured sword-level sword wielder now, so it's very normal that you can't beat her. Guhan looked down and saw a snow-white cat crouching beside Guhan. Guhan could not feel a trace of power from this white cat. If it was not for the cat's ability to speak, Guhan would have thought it was just an ordinary white cat. You are Bastet? Guhan asked tentatively. Since Ice Eyes had already appeared, it was also a matter of course that Bastet would appear here. Mr. Guhan can actually call out my name. It seems that Her Majesty's secret plan back then has already taken effect. Presumably, Mr. Guhan already knows that you have a deep connection with Her Majesty. This cat stretched out its hand. Don't misunderstand, it did not want to shake hands with Guhan, but wanted to lick the cute pink ball of flesh on its palm. Does this mean that you admit that the dungeon in the game is Yi Qing's backup plan? Guhan raised his eyebrows and asked. I guess so. Bastet nodded her cat head, white and fluffy, especially cute. Her Majesty has really done a lot for Mr. Guhan, so I hope that Mr. Guhan can forgive Her Majesty. I don't think I've forgiven you. I've always been blessed by His Majesty Shroud Heaven, and I can't thank him enough. How could I possibly blame him, much less forgive him? Guhan was confused by Bast's words. What was the relationship between him and Jetian Jendi? Why would he want to forgive her? Did she do something to let me down? You'll find out in the future, Mr. Guhan. I just hope that when the time comes, Mr. Guhan will remember what His Majesty Shroud Heaven has done to you, and forgive Her Majesty. Don't let her suffer for the rest of her life. Bastet said very sincerely. It was hard to imagine that this was the sinister and cunning cat god Bastet from the temple. He now looked like a loyal dog covering the sky. Oh, no, calling him a loyal dog seemed to make the husky feel ashamed. If the bear and the cat were still in this trial formation, then the husky was likely to be in this trial formation as well. I don't know what you're talking about, but I know that His Majesty Shroud Heaven has done for me, and I'll remember it. I won't forget it for the rest of my life. If His Majesty Shroud Heaven does harm to me in the future, then I'll remember it, Guhan replied seriously. But if you looked closely at Guhan's words, you'd realize that Guhan hadn't promised anything. It was just that he would remember the kindness they had shown him. Remembering the kindness they had shown him was one thing, but forgiving the other party was another. If the injury was too deep and fatal for Ji Han, then Guhan wouldn't be bound by it. He'd deal with it in his own way. Sigh, Your Majesty, this is all I can do for you. Bast, the cute white cat, sighed, then jumped onto Guhan's knee and laid on Guhan's leg. She squinted her eyes and said, Since Mr. Guhan is here, then you must have been stopped by that stupid bear, Isis, at the final gate. Yes, I'm no match for her, Guhan admitted. Back then, Mr. Ji Han single-handedly defeated us when we had just regained our bodies. I don't really care about that, but Ice Eyes has never forgotten. She has always wanted to defeat Mr. Ji Han, so she was willing to disobey King Shroud Heaven's order not to stop Mr. Ji Han in order to avenge herself. I hope Mr. Ji Han can understand her, Bast said slowly, as if Bast was pleading for Ice Eye's sake. I can understand her, but she can't understand me. Guhan shook his head. I'm ready to give up. With Isis blocking the way, I can't go. When I left, I heard that Yuzhong City's Yang fortress had been destroyed by Yuan Ku. Yuzhong City might also be in danger. I can't waste any more time here. I need to return to Yuzhong City and contribute to the city that raised me. When I return to the final gate and find my companions, I'll leave this formation. We'll meet again if fate wills it. No. You can't go. Meow. Bast, who hadn't used a meow until now, suddenly let out a shrill cry. She jumped onto Guhan's neck and whispered into Guhan's ear, "Mr. Guhan, you can't give up. What will we do if you give up?" "What do you mean, what will we do? What does it have to do with you whether I leave or not?" Guhan pulled Bast down from his neck. Bast's sharp claws were on his neck. Although Bast seemed to be unintentional, Guhan would never let his neck be exposed to a Yuan Ku who didn't even know if he was a friend or foe. Although Bast acted like he was an old friend and didn't intend to hurt him, things like Yuan Ku, especially a sly Yuan Ku like Bast, made Guhan believe only one word of what it said. "Of course it has something to do with me, meow." Bast could only wave her snow-white claws randomly as Guhan grabbed her neck. "We've been trapped in this formation for 700 years. His Majesty Shroud Heaven promised us that when the time comes, Mr. Guhan will come and take away the things that His Majesty left for Mr. Guhan. When the time is right, Mr. Jiyu Han will come and take the things that His Majesty left for Mr. Jiyu Han, and we will also be able to regain our freedom. Mr. Guhan, how can this have nothing to do with us? We've had enough of this. So that's how it is." Guhan put Bast down. In fact, Guhan had already deduced this from his conversation with Isis. Isis had also said the same thing. It seemed that Guhan had to take away the things inside before they could regain their freedom. Then let's wait for others to see it. There are hundreds of sword bearers in this formation. They are the most outstanding sword bearers of our era. There must be someone among them who can defeat Isis. Or just let Isis let them in. "You can still regain your freedom," Guhan said deliberately. "No, it's impossible for those people to do that. They can't free us." Meow. Bast was very anxious. Isis has no right to open the back door for anyone other than Mr. Guhan. Even if she doesn't resist and lets others in, they will not be able to enter the real final room. At most, they will be put into a fake room and get some trinkets left behind by His Majesty. Only Mr. Guhan can enter the real final room. No one else can even see the door. That's amazing. How does this formation know if Guhan has entered the final room? Does it want to draw my blood and test my DNA when I reach the door of the final room? Guhan asked curiously. That's not it. Bast rubbed his head. There is a whole set of identification systems here. His Majesty Shroud Heaven designed some special missions. These special missions can only be completed by you, Mr. Guhan. The formation relies on these missions to determine your identity. Our existence is only to support the operation of the formation, but we can't be sure of anything in this formation. Meow. Special missions that only I can complete. Guhan could not help but recall the pile of hamburgers and hundreds of bottles of alcohol. He seemed to understand something. Although I really want to let you out, I have no choice. Guhan spread his hands. Isis is blocking the door. As long as she doesn't give up on her hatred for me, I won't be able to pass her test. Why don't you go talk to her and ask her to let me in? It's useless. If we could talk to her, we would have. Meow. Bast the white cat swung her tail weakly. From the moment she lured the sword-bearers outside into this training formation, we tried to persuade her to give up on the idea of stopping you, Mr. Guhan. But Isis's hatred for you is too deep. It has already surpassed her desire to leave this place and gain freedom. So, we couldn't persuade her at all. Meow. Then let's fight. Guhan gave Bast an idea. Although you are good friends, when it comes to freedom, you can't care so much. Anubis probably wants freedom too. You can work together to subdue Isis and trap her without harming her life. Wouldn't that be better? Do you think we don't want to do that? Meow. Bast swung her tail in front of Guhan. The two of us are no match for Isis. Anubis was locked up by Isis because he lost in a fight. If it wasn't for my nimble body that allowed me to escape, No one would be responsible for explaining everything to you now. Meow. Bast licked her paw helplessly. Only then did Guhan realize that there was a scar on her paw that had not fully healed. So, everything depends on you. The treasures left behind by His Majesty shroud the heavens, and our freedom are all in your hands, Your Majesty Guhan. What did you just call me? Mr. Guhan. Dear Mr. Guhan, everything is in your hands. Chapter 406. After communicating with Bastet, Guhan roughly understood the situation of the three Egyptian gods at this time. It turned out that after the heaven-shrouding sword emperor set up this trial array, the three Egyptian deities were placed in the trial array as the helpers of the trial array. Although it was said to be placed and assisted, it was actually similar to imprisonment. At that time, Zetian Jendi did not seem to have much time to leave this world. To prevent Yuan Ku's subordinates from returning to Yuan Ku's camp and wreaking havoc in this world after he left. Judging from Isis' hatred for humans, this was very likely. Once these three Yuan Kus were set free, there was a 90% chance that these three Yuan Kus would go back to being the Yuan Kus that harmed humans. However, these three Yuan Kus had done a lot for Zetian Jendi and made a lot of contributions. If Zetian Jendi killed these three Yuan Kus, Zetian Jendi could not bring herself to do it. She was not an ungrateful person, so Zetian Jendi trapped these three Yuan Kus in the trial formation to prevent them from going out to harm humans, and at the same time, to help her do something in the future. After all, no matter how powerful a swordbearer was, they would not be able to live for 700 years. Only Yuan Kus, who had no concept of life and death, could last until Guhan appeared. In order to truly trap these three, Zetian Jendi also set up a seal on them, so that they could not go too far away from the trial formation. Even their strength was limited to the level of Dragon Yuan Kus, which was about the same level as a famed swordbearer. At this level, Guhan could still put up a fight if he used all his trump cards. But something unexpected happened. For some reason, Isis suddenly broke free from the seal set by Zetian Jendi. However, she did not completely break free from the seal, but only partially removed it. Her strength was restored to the level of Meteor Yuan Kus, and at the same time, she could leave the trial formation for a short period of time. At first, Bast and Anubis were very happy about this, but then they found that as Isis was freed, the anger in her heart was magnified a lot. Originally, Bast and Anubis were looking forward to Guhan coming to free them, but suddenly, they magnified their resentment towards Guhan and began to say that she would rather not have freedom than to prevent Guhan from getting those things. At this time, Bast and Anubis had already noticed that something was wrong. They began to persuade Isis to give up this unreliable idea, but Isis did not care about it at all. She completely ignored their persuasion and even started fighting with them in the end. In the end, Anubis was locked up by Isis, and Bast relied on his agility to escape from Isis. Then, he quietly waited for Guhan's arrival. After listening to Bast's explanation, Guhan thought for a long time before frowning. According to what you said, Isis is either crazy, or her mind has been contaminated by something. But no matter what the reason is, I must defeat her in order to give you freedom. But it is impossible for me to defeat her. She is too powerful, and I am no match for her. No, Mr. Guhan, you still have a chance, Bast said urgently. I remember the day we parted ways with His Majesty Zetian. I asked His Majesty what would happen if Lord Guhan did not appear at the time. His Majesty told me that Mr. Guhan would definitely appear, because it was his destiny. Then, I asked His Majesty what would happen if Mr. Guhan could not pass the previous stages and reach the final destination. His Majesty told me that Mr. Guhan would definitely pass the stages. As long as he was still called Guhan, these stages would not be a problem for him. Finally, I asked His Majesty what would happen if something happened and Mr. Guhan could not reach the final destination. At this time, His Majesty, who had always been very confident, suddenly lost her confidence. She hesitated for a moment before saying, at that time, there might be some rats hiding in the dark who wanted to destroy her plan, but she had already left the final trump card in this trial formation. If Mr. Guhan could find the final trump card, then everything in this trial formation would disappear, and nothing would be able to stop Mr. Guhan from moving forward. So, I guessed that Isis's change might be caused by those rats hiding in the dark. If Mr. Guhan could find the final trump card left by His Majesty, then he would definitely be able to defeat Isis and return us freedom. It was really hard for Bast, the cat, to say so much with her small mouth. You mean the final trump card? Guhan stood up from the ground. Tell me, among the hundreds and thousands of cubicles here, where exactly is the ultimate trump card hidden, and what is this ultimate trump card? Ling, how long have we waited? In front of the final destination, inside a pink tent, Lionian Ling and Song Fei were lying on the same bed, covered with a quilt, watching a movie projected from the same terminal. This movie was downloaded by Song Fei in advance. It was about an unlucky ordinary person who transmigrated into the body of a dead Yuan Ku, and then used Yuan Ku's body as a human spy, and finally helped the swordbearers to annihilate Yuan Ku's forces in one fell swoop. The script of this movie was quite good, and there were many laughs and climaxes, especially the male lead, who was very good-looking. Both Song Fei and Lionian Ling enjoyed watching it. So watching movies is so interesting. Why didn't I know before? Fleeting Time Lin said after the movie was over. It seemed like the little princess of the Fleeting Time family was very satisfied with the movie. It left a lingering aftertaste. Of course the movie is interesting. Have you never watched a movie before? Song Fei asked. She was a loyal movie lover, and was a professional movie critic with a VIP sign on many movie websites. Many people only watched the movies she recommended. But what made Song Fei feel a little regretful was that she would not have much time to invest in movies after becoming a swordbearer. Just like now, she had been away for almost 10 days. There must have been many interesting movies in these 10 days, but unfortunately, she could not watch any of them. I rarely watch them. Lionian Ling shook her head. The children of the Liu Nian family have to devote all their time to training themselves. I'm afraid I won't have a chance to watch a movie with you in bed in the future. After leaving here, I have to return to the Liu Nian family. There are too many things I have to explain to my two ancestors. Sometimes, I really envy commoner swordbearers like you. You don't have to carry so many things that don't belong to you. And then you have to hand these things that you don't like to your descendants. You can't refuse these things at all. When Lionian Ling said this, she felt very emotional. After all, she was a girl. Among the more than 20 generations of descendants of the Liu Nian family, there were very few female descendants. It was indeed a very painful and cruel thing for them to shoulder the heavy burden of such a huge family as daughters. Forget it. You don't know how lucky you are. If I could choose to reincarnate, I'd definitely be born into a family like yours in my next life. Song Fei noticed the mysterious smile on Fleeting Ling's face, and immediately explained, "Don't get me wrong. I'm not envying the lifestyle of nobles like you. I'm not envying the lifestyle of nobles like you. To me, as long as I have a house, some money, a computer, an internet connection, and a closet of clothes, I'll be satisfied. I can live happily. The reason why I'm envious of you is that you can receive so much training from a young age. You can become so strong and help others." At this point, Song Fei's expression became a little gloomy. For example, this time, you and Guhan fought along the way. All the skill-based missions were completed by you. I can only be a spectator and watch you complete these missions silently. I feel like I'm a dispensable spectator. Whether I'm around or not, it doesn't affect you at all. I'm only able to reach the place closest to the destination with your help. When Guhan was fighting in there yesterday, I really wanted to rush in and help him. He's always been the one helping me. Without his help, I wouldn't even have the chance to become a sword bearer. So I really want to help him. Even if it's just once, I'll be satisfied if I can really help him once. Even if I die, I'll be able to close my eyes, Song Fei said emotionally. I'll slap your mouth. Lionian Ling gave Song Fei a light kiss on his mouth. Don't talk about dying. Don't you know that we call what you said a flag? Anyone who says something like that will probably die. To be honest, you can't say anything like that in the future. Otherwise, you'll really be in trouble. Then there's nothing I can do. Song Fei spread his hands. I've already said it. If I'm going to die, I can only accept it. But if this flag can really come true, doesn't it mean that I can really help Guhan one day? That's good too. I have nothing to regret. You. Liu Ling was speechless. Seeing that Song Yifei had casually raised a huge flag, Liu Ling was speechless. She could only hope that Song Yifei's life would not be ruined by Guhan. Ling. Song Yifei wanted to say something to Liu Ling suddenly. Liu Ling's hand covered Song Yifei's mouth. She said quickly, "Let's talk about it later. Put on your clothes first." I heard footsteps. There's a second person here. Chapter 407. It's him. Song Yifei was surprised to see the second sword wielder in the final stage. Do you know him? Asked Liu Ling. Yes, he came with us. He's also a sword wielder of Yuzhang City. His name is Ku Rokin, and he's the son of Sword Immortal Baiju of Yuzhang City. Song Yifei explained in detail. The second sword wielder to reach the final stage was Ku Rokin. It seemed like Ku Rokin's arrogance was not without reason. At the very least, he was strong. Sword Immortal Baiju's son? The person in control of Yuzhang City? Liu Ling nodded. Liu Ling knew about Sword Immortal Baiju. He was a very dignified old man. Liu Ling had met Sword Immortal Baiju during her grandfather's 70th birthday. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ku Rokin. I'm Liu Ling. It's a pleasure to meet you. Liu Ling greeted Ku Rokin. She greeted Ku Rokin not because Ku Rokin was Wu Dao's son, but because everyone who entered the trial formation was here to save her, Liu Ling. Under such circumstances, it was necessary for Liu Ling to greet Ku Rokin. You're Liu Ling, the successor of the Liu Nian family? Unexpectedly, Ku Rokin did not shake Liu Ling's hand. Instead, he looked at Liu Ling with a fastidious gaze, like a teacher who insisted on students' attire at the school gate. So you're from the Liu Nian family. You're not worthy of inheriting Kunzu's legacy. Alright, Ku Rokin's arrogance is acting up again. Liu Ling almost choked on her breath when she saw Ku Rokin's reaction. Song Yifei pulled Liu Ling back and comforted her softly. Don't mind him, Ling. That's just how he is. He's always frivolous to everyone. In Guhan's words, he's a severe case of arrogance. Just ignore him and pretend he doesn't exist. Chimpage. Liu Ling snorted coldly. It's unfortunate that Sword Immortal Baiju has such a son. It seems that he's going to squander all of Sword Immortal Baiju's inheritance sooner or later. I won't take a single cent from that old man. I, Ku Rokin, will forge an era that belongs to me, Ku Rokin. I, Ku Rokin, will not take a single cent from Wu Dao. Please don't associate me with Wu Dao, Miss Liu Ling. I don't want to hear such words ever again. Ku Rokin's expression froze when he heard Liu Ling's words. Whatever. I don't think I'll ever want to see you again. Liu Ling turned around and ran back into her tent. She could not be bothered with the severely arrogant man anymore. Ku Rokin, on the other hand, was overjoyed. He walked straight to the small bar in the middle of the tent and read through the quest details. As long as I defeat Yuan Ku, will I be able to enter the finish line? Ku Rokin looked at Liu Ling's tent in disdain after reading through the quest details. I thought that the descendant of the Liu Nian clan was something great. I didn't expect him to be a coward. You're clearly one step ahead of me, and the way to victory is right in front of you. Yet, you're hesitating and afraid of a mere Yuan Ku. You're simply a disgrace to Lord Kunzu. At this point, Ku Rokin was a little angry. He idolized Kunzu. Seeing that the descendant of Kunzu was so cowardly, he was very displeased. It was as if he had lost face. Ku Rokin really treated himself as the descendant of Kunzu. To think that he had so much confidence. Since the descendant of Kunzu doesn't dare to fight, then let me defeat this Yuan Ku. Doesn't this mean that I'm more suitable to be the descendant of Kunzu than the descendant of Kunzu? Thinking until here, Ku Rokin couldn't help but feel a little excited. Without any hesitation, he strode into the door that led to Isai's room. Hehe, what an idiot. Even the descendant of the Liu Nian family doesn't dare to enter a place like this. What kind of place is this? Liuyan Ling, who was observing the situation outside through the small window of the tent, smiled when she saw Ku Rokin enter the room. She then turned to Song Ifei with a smile. Ifei, let's make a bet. How long will it take before we hear the notification that this fellow is kicked out? Sure. Song Ifei was immediately interested. He stuck out a finger and said, I'll bet 1 minute. 1 minute? You're overestimating him. I'll bet 10 seconds. Sneered Fleeting Time, and began counting with his finger. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. 10 seconds later, there was still no notification of Zhu Elvren's failure. Song Ifei immediately clapped and laughed out loud. Haha, it seems that I've won. Before Song Ifei could finish his sentence, he heard the male version of the heaven-covering Sword Emperor's voice. The participant has failed, and has now been sent back 200 squares. The next challenger may enter the room. 12 seconds. Liuyan Ling's face was drawn. I didn't expect this fellow to be so capable. Zhu Luren, who was praised by Fleeting Time Ling as having some ability, sat on the floor of a certain room with a blank expression. He had been dealt a heavy blow. After he entered the room, the stupid bear inside launched a merciless attack on him without saying anything. If Zhu Elvren's sword was not in his hand, and Zhu Elvren himself was targeting the sword owner, he would have been KO'd in that surprise attack. However, Zhu Luren only managed to block 1 sword strike. Following that, the female bear began to attack him continuously, which was invisible to the naked eye. Zhu Luren felt that he was constantly being hit in his vital parts. In just 5 seconds, he felt pain that he had never felt in his life. I would have died if the female bear didn't want to kill me, thought Ku Rokin. The female bear finally stopped her attacks just as he was about to die. She opened up a portal and threw Ku Rokin into it. That was how Ku Rokin managed to survive. I've lost. Damn it. I can't even fight back. Damn it. Damn it. This was the first time Ku Rokin tasted such a terrible defeat. His entire outlook on life had darkened. Maybe I'm just a good-for-nothing. Maybe I don't deserve to inherit the mantle of the sword ancestor. I should always be a good-for-nothing. Well, this teenager probably couldn't bear such a heavy blow and immediately began to give up on himself. This was the disadvantage of always winning and never suffering defeat. He would instantly begin to doubt his own outlook on life. No, I'm not a trash. It's not like Kunzu hasn't failed before. I must pull myself together. I, Ku Rokin, will climb back up from where I fell. I want to cultivate harder. One day, I will be able to defeat that she-bear. Your Excellency Sword Master, are you telling me to persevere with the help of this she-bear? I didn't expect Ku Rokin, this Chunibya, to be able to adjust his state of mind so well. In less than 5 seconds, he broke free from his self-abandonment and became even more determined. This was the standard of a hot-blooded main character. No, Ku Rokin was even more hot-blooded than a hot-blooded main character. After a hot-blooded main character experienced failure, they would need a friend, a senior, or a lover to wake them up. Sometimes, a couple of people would die to wake them up. Ku Rokin didn't need these things at all. He could climb back up on his own. What a great person he was. Unfortunately, he wasn't a main character. What a pity. Speaking of the main character, when Zhu Elvren looked around him, he actually found another person sitting on the other side of the room. He was holding a sword in his arms, and his eyes were closed. He didn't know what he was doing, but he seemed to be meditating. This person is the one who came with me. What's his name again? Ku Rokin's memory wasn't bad. He actually recognized that this person was Guhan who came with him. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember this person's name. However, to have the great Ku Rokin remember your face, what else could you ask for? Forget it. Let's not care about him. I'm going to return to the finishing point and fight with that female bear again. This time, I can definitely. Zhu Elvren wanted to say that he could definitely defeat that female bear this time, but when the words reached his mouth, his imposing manner inexplicably disappeared. He couldn't bring himself to say that he could defeat the female bear. The reason was simple. Ku Rokin knew very well that he couldn't defeat the female bear. The female bear was too strong. Wait, I remember the notification mentioned that I would have to retreat 200 steps after failing. Which means that all those who fail will come to this room. Thinking until here, Ku Rokin's expression turned ugly. When he arrived at this room, Guhan was already inside. If all those who failed would come to this room, didn't that mean that Guhan was ahead of him and had reached the finishing line earlier than him? He arrived earlier than me, but he still doesn't dare to move forward. Seems like he's also a piece of trash. In the end, Ku Rokin ignored Guhan and continued to stride towards the finishing line. He, Ku Rokin, was a man who would never be defeated by difficulties. He would become the second man in Kunzu. This is already the 5th batch. Liuyan Ling looked at the room that was gradually becoming lively. As time passed, more and more teams arrived at the finishing line, but Guhan still hadn't returned. This was already the 2nd day after Ji Yuhan's failure. 2 days was more than enough for someone as strong as Ji Yuhan to walk 200 steps. Could it be that he was unlucky enough to encounter some kind of spatial teleportation, and was teleported to a place further ahead? As Liuyan Ling's imagination ran wild, the door of the room suddenly opened again. Another team of swordsmen entered the room. Ling. Great, I finally see you again. It's great that you're fine. The person who ran over to talk to Liuyan Ling was Liuyan Ling's childhood friend, Shu Tianyuan. Behind Shu Tianyuan was a timid figure. Yi Wenjun, the direct descendant of Zhe Tianjendi, and also the weakest of all the participants, had also reached the finishing line. Chapter 408. What's going on? Why is everyone gathered here? A handsome European and American fresh meat with blonde hair and blue eyes walked into the door of the final destination. He was surprised to find that there were more than 100 people gathered in this room. It seemed that most of the sword bearers who entered the trial array had gathered here. Oh, isn't this Heinrich from the royal family of Berlin? I didn't expect you to come. A black-haired man with an oriental face came to Heinrich and greeted him. It turns out to be Mr. Wu from London. We haven't seen each other for a few years. Heinrich was the direct descendant of the Jendi royal family of Berlin, Jendi, while Mr. Wu was the clansman of Longsha Jendi in London. Longsha Jendi was one of the 2 remaining Jendi clansmen of mankind. He was also in the prime of his life and could protect mankind for at least 20 to 30 years. Therefore, the clansmen of Longsha Jendi were very popular in the entire human world. The aristocratic families of the major base cities were also happy to give face to the Wu family. After all human beings had to rely on Longsha Jendi to be safe. There was no need to offend Longsha Jendi. Therefore, Mr. Wu, who was only a guy from a distant branch of Longsha Jendi, could sit on an equal footing with the direct descendant of the Jendi family and talk cheerfully and wittily. I don't know how long Mr. Wu has been here. What's the situation now? Can you tell me about it? This Heinrich, who was obviously of Western descent, spoke beautiful Mandarin. Even the way they addressed each other was also a Chinese style of address. This couldn't be helped. It was explained before that most of the sword maidens in this world were Chinese sword maidens. What was more amazing was that even though the sword maidens were forged in the West, they also spoke fluent Mandarin. In order to be able to communicate with their sword maidens, Mandarin was widely spread all over the world. Gradually, Mandarin was the only mainstream language left in the world. The other languages became minority languages that required the government to specially send students to learn the minority languages that were circulating. Heinrich was a standard European aristocrat, so it was not surprising that he could speak Mandarin. Not so good. Mr. Wu shook his head. Mr. Heinrich, you're late. Yuzhong City, Yangjing City, Leningrad City, Los Angeles City, London City, Buenos Aires City, and Berlin City have almost reached this last step. But we're all stuck here, unable to move forward. Some sword bearers can't hold on any longer and have chosen to leave. What's going on? Why is everyone stuck here? Heinrich was confused. What is this level testing? The situation is like this. Mr. Wu explained the general situation of the last stage. Heinrich shook his head and waved his hand. I don't believe it. Is there really no one who can defeat the last Yuan coup and reach the final destination? Absolutely not. Mr. Wu shook his head. The first to reach here is Miss Liunian Ling from the Liunian family. According to her, she has been waiting here for almost 5 days. In these 5 days, every person who enters will hear the notification of failure and retreat 200 steps. There has been no notification of success. Miss Liunian Ling. Heinrich's eyes lit up when he heard Liunian Ling's name. You mean, Miss Liunian Ling is here too? That's right. She's the first to arrive. After all, she's the descendant of the Liunian family. Mr. Wu pointed at the tent in the middle of the group of leaders in the room. That's Miss Liunian Ling's tent. Mr. Heinrich, you just arrived, so you haven't met Miss Liunian Ling yet, right? Do you want to meet her and pay her a visit? Mph, I won't go for now. When I, Heinrich, defeat that Yuan Ku in the room and obtain the treasure at the final destination, I'll give it to the beautiful and noble Miss Liunian Ling as a greeting gift. Isn't that better? Heinrich said confidently. It seemed that he was very confident in his own strength. Sigh, Gongzi Heinrich, since we're friends, I'll give you a piece of advice. Don't get involved in the mess in that room, Gongzi Wu advised. Can't you see that Miss Fleeting Lin is waiting here as well? What does that mean? It means that Miss Liunian Ling is also helpless against that Yuan Ku. I also heard that in the first few days, Miss Liunian Ling advised everyone she met not to enter the room to look for that Yuan Ku. She also readily admitted that she was no match for that Yuan Ku. Could it be that you, Mr. Heinrich, are more capable than Miss Liunian Ling? Even the people from the Liunian family can't defeat that Yuan Ku? Heinrich's face finally showed some fear and hesitation. Seeing this situation, Mr. Wu struck while the iron was hot. Heinrich, you still don't know, right? Not only Miss Liunian Ling, but also the son of the Sword Fairy of Yuzhong City, the descendant of the great Confucian family, the twin stars of Buenos Aires, the madman of Leningrad, the hero king of London. Oh right, that lady from Berlin also failed after entering. I heard the notification of her failure with my own ears. What, Lady also failed? Heinrich was even more shaken when he heard Lady's name. Lady was not an ordinary person. She was the tyrant of Berlin city. She had beaten up all her peers in Berlin and made them obedient. Some of them were famous sword-bearers. Heinrich was no exception. Because he was not a gentleman when he first met Lady, he was beaten up by Lady 5 times. After that, he trembled all over when he saw Lady. In short, Lady was recognized as the strongest sword-bearer in Berlin city. Heinrich might not have a deep understanding of the descendants of the Liunian family. After all, they were separated by 2 cities. It was impossible for them to meet unless there was a major event. However, Heinrich had a deep impression of the Demon King beside him. In Heinrich's heart, Lady was an invincible existence. He did not expect this invincible existence to fail. He, Heinrich, could not help but want to retreat. But if he retreated without even seeing the boss, then he, Heinrich, would lose too much face. How could he, a member of the royal family, admit defeat without even fighting? Just as Heinrich was struggling, suddenly, there was a commotion at the door he came in from. A group of people in white robes walked in from the door. It's them. People from Jerusalem. When Heinrich saw the group of people in white robes, he could not help but show a look of disdain in his eyes. Although the city they were in did not have absolute freedom, it was full of all kinds of inhumane restrictions and discrimination. However, the difference between these cities and Jerusalem was like heaven and earth. Therefore, every time they saw people from Jerusalem, the sword-bearers from other cities would have a natural sense of superiority and disdain. This group of people from Jerusalem was very large. There were more than 20 of them. Almost all the people from Jerusalem who entered the trial formation were in this group. The person walking at the front was none other than Ashima, the saintess of Jerusalem. Strange, why are all the people from Jerusalem gathered together? Mr. Wu asked curiously. What's so strange about that? Heinrich rolled his eyes. They stayed at the last intersection for a few days to wait for the people behind them to gather together before moving forward. Otherwise, they would have arrived here a long time ago. The future swordplay of Ashima is too terrifying. Heinrich could not help but recall the scene when he fought with the people from Jerusalem at the intersection. He also recalled the pitiful memory of being brutally beaten by the future sword. He shuddered. Perhaps with the future sword's ability, it can defeat that boss. Heinrich thought silently. The ability of the future sword changed according to the opponent's ability. The stronger the opponent, the stronger the future sword. Perhaps this saintess, Ashima, had a chance of winning. Therefore, Heinrich began to look forward to Ashima's actions. He wanted to see if she could defeat the powerful boss. In the end, Ashima did not go straight to the boss's room as Heinrich had imagined. Instead, she went to Liuyan Ling's tent and spoke to Liuyan Ling through the tent. Then, she left without saying a word. Heinrich expressed that it was normal. Everyone knew about the relationship between Jerusalem and the Liuyan family. Their relationship was notoriously complicated and strange. Both sides disliked each other, but due to the kindness of Kanzu for establishing Jerusalem, the people of Jerusalem had to maintain sufficient respect for the Liuyan family. Otherwise, it would be treason and go against human justice. It would cause Jerusalem to become even more isolated from the other 7 base cities. This was something the people of Jerusalem did not wish to see. Therefore, when they went out, they had to maintain respect for the Liuyan family regardless of whether they were willing or not. They had to greet the Liuyan family. Fortunately, the Liuyan family was small in numbers. Most of the people of Jerusalem would never be able to meet the Liuyan family. Young Master Heinrich, look. Their saintess is about to enter the room. I hope they succeed. Then, we will be able to witness the sword light of the Emperor Sword's birth. Young Master Wu sincerely hoped that this saintess would succeed. The reason why they stayed here despite knowing that it was impossible for them to pass the boss test was so that they could shine the light of the legendary Emperor's sword. This would increase the chances of them successfully synchronizing with a higher level sword lady in the future. Even if it was only a 1% chance, this was something that could change their fate in the future. This was not a joke. They would not leave this place until they had completely given up. I hope so. Heinrich did not know what he was thinking. He hoped that Ashima would succeed, but at the same time, he hoped that she would fail. If the feudal Jerusalemites were to win, the people of the other 7 cities would be disgraced. The participant has failed. She has now retreated by 200 steps. The next challenger may enter the room to continue the challenge. Without any surprises, the Saintess of Jerusalem, the wielder of the Sword of Former Determination and the Sword of Future, Ashima also announced that she had failed. Chapter 409. How can he be so strong? Does Zhe Tian Jendi really want to give us that treasure? Will that finish line be empty? Ashma thought angrily as she stood up from the ground. Seeing so many people stuck at the last stage, especially Liuyan Ling who couldn't move, and hearing that even Guhan had been defeated, Ashma was happy from the bottom of her heart. She was different from them. With the future swords, she was confident that she could defeat even the dragon-level Yuan Ku. This way, Ashma would be able to defeat the descendant of the Liuyan family, Liuyan Ling. With this great achievement, her position in Jerusalem would be much better than it was now. Unfortunately, her opponent wasn't the dragon-level Yuan Ku, but the Follis-level Yuan Ku, who was 1 realm and 2 realms higher than the dragon-level Yuan Ku. This directly determined Ashma's tragic fate. The future swords could only intercept the future of opponents who were 1 realm higher than her. If the opponent was 1 realm higher, then the future swords would not be able to touch the opponent's future at all. That was why it was a tragedy for Ashima. Before she could summon the afterlife sword, she was pushed to the ground by Isis' bear-like butt. Isis opened a door and sent her back 200 steps. This happened in less than 5 seconds. It was a tragedy. Ashma slowly crawled up from the ground in a daze. She looked around and found a few other sword-bearers with gloomy expressions, as if they had suffered a heavy blow. It seemed that they had been killed by Isis in an instant. They couldn't accept the blow and lay on the ground, pretending to be corpses. What's there to be shocked about? Of course the sword-bearers would be killed by the Follis-level Yuan Ku. Ashma was very disdainful of the people lying on the ground. She tidied up her messy veil and prepared to move forward again, returning to the finish line. But just as she was about to leave, she found something interesting. Guhan was still sitting on the ground, meditating. Why are you still here? Didn't you fail 5 days ago and come here? Ashma squatted in front of Guhan and waved her palm in front of him, trying to attract Guhan's attention. Unfortunately, Guhan's eyes were tightly shut, turning a blind eye to everything. Ashma had established a connection with Liuyan Ling through her personal terminal the last time they met. When she visited Liuyan Ling through the tent just now, they exchanged many things. Although it seemed like Liuyan Ling was ignoring Ashma on the surface. But in fact, the two of them exchanged a lot of things through the Bluetooth device of their personal terminals. Liuyan Ling also specifically mentioned Guhan, saying that Guhan had been back for 5 days but still hadn't returned. She asked Ashima to check on Guhan when she came back later and see if he was trapped halfway. At first, Ashma was very angry when she heard Liuyan Ling's request. What does she mean? Does she think that I, Ashma, will definitely fail? Therefore, Ashma didn't take this request to heart at all. Now that she saw Guhan, she suddenly remembered this request. She didn't expect that after 5 days, Guhan still hadn't moved at all and had been staying here all this time. TSK, I thought you were very powerful, but it turns out that you're also a piece of trash who can't take the blow of failure. Ashma originally had a good impression of Guhan, but now that she saw his dejected and disheartened look, her evaluation of him instantly dropped a lot. Forget it, I'm leaving. If I return late, I don't know what kind of bad conjectures those idiots in white robes will have about me. Ashma thought silently, then prepared to ignore Guhan and leave. However, when she took a step forward, suddenly, Guhan moved. Guhan suddenly opened his eyes, and in an instant, 2 rays of light that seemed to have substance shot out from his eyes. These 2 rays of light were like super 10,000-watt light bulbs, and the instant brightness was enough to blind Ashma's eyes. These 2 rays of light appeared very suddenly, and disappeared very quickly as well. In less than 0.1 seconds, they disappeared into Guhan's eyes. The others who didn't notice here didn't notice Guhan's abnormality at all, but all this was seen by Ashma. What's wrong with this guy? Did he cry his eyes blind? Ashma speculated maliciously in her heart. She didn't want to leave now. She wanted to see what Guhan was going to do next, and whether his eyes would emit that strange light again. However, after watching for a long time, Ashma didn't see any movement from Guhan. Just when Ashma thought that Guhan was dead, Guhan suddenly spoke. Your Excellency, you've been watching for so long. Can you do me a favor? Guhan's voice was very weak, like a person who was about to die. What do you want me to help you with? Ashma's voice was cold, and she still acted like a saintess. It's very simple. Help me up. Guhan smiled bitterly, and his voice became even weaker. I've been sitting on the ground for too long, and the blood in my feet have long been blocked. I've lost all feeling, and I can't rely on my own strength to get up. This is your Ling's job, not mine. All right, I still have something to do, so I won't disturb you any longer. I'll take my leave first. Ashma snorted coldly. She still looked cold and noble, but there was a hint of cheerfulness in her words. Seeing Guhan, the person who defeated her, being humiliated, Ashma was very happy. If you don't help me up, I'll die here. Guhan begged bitterly. Ashma imagined it. I haven't eaten for 5 days, and now I can't move my arms and legs. If you don't help me circulate my blood, I'll really die here. What will you do if Ling finds out that you didn't help me when I was dying? Are you threatening me? Ashma turned her head abruptly, and the mouth under the veil spat out a cold breath. No, I'm begging you. A wise man submits to circumstances. Although Guhan was a cold and aloof person, it didn't mean that he was stupid. Although it didn't mean that he would really die if Ashma didn't help him, it would still cause him a lot of trouble. Right now, every cell in his body was craving for energy. He had to eat immediately, or his body would suffer irreversible damage. Page, grab this. Ashma didn't reach out her hand directly. Instead, she pushed a strand of her white veil in front of Guhan, indicating for Guhan to grab her white veil and pull him up through it. It seemed that Ashma hated Guhan very much. Otherwise, She wouldn't even want to let Guhan touch her. "Thank you." Guhan made a very ugly smile, and then his fingers grabbed the white veil in front of him with great difficulty. Seeing that the other party had a firm grip, Ashma snorted unhappily without a second thought. She pulled forcefully and pulled Guhan, who was still in a meditative posture, up from the ground. Ah! Ashma originally only wanted to pull Guhan up, but she didn't expect that Guhan's legs had completely lost the ability to stand. Before he could stand up straight, his body went limp again. Of course, when she pulled him, she would naturally pull him towards her. Since Guhan couldn't stand properly, he would naturally fall forward and fall onto Ashma's body. Therefore, we saw Guhan fall in front of Ashma, and his head was placed between Ashma's breasts. Not to mention, Ashma, who didn't stand out under the white veil, was actually a very voluptuous woman. Her breasts were much bigger than Lionian Ling's and Song Ifei's. Her breasts were at least a D cup. There was also a delicate fragrance surrounding her breasts, soaking through her robe and constantly entering Guhan's nose. "You!" Seeing that her breasts were being attacked, Ashma instinctively wanted to release her breasts, but she heard Guhan say in a low voice, "Don't make any big movements, or else you'll alarm those people lying on the ground. If they see us like this, your reputation will be completely ruined. Are you sure you want to move?" Hearing Guhan's words, although Ashma gritted her teeth, she forcefully suppressed her anger. With one hand, she pushed Guhan away from her chest, and then held onto Guhan's shoulder. Supporting him, she walked step by step with Guhan into the next room. This room was empty, not a single person was in it. Ashma pushed Guhan to the ground, then pulled out her sword and pointed it at Guhan's chest. She said fiercely, "If you dare to say a word about what happened today, even if I have to disregard my morals as a sword-bearer, I will kill you. Don't worry, I don't want to offend those religious lunatics in Jerusalem." Guhan nodded. Although he had only walked a few steps with Ashma's support, Guhan's chi and blood had already begun to circulate. Guhan immediately began to control his sword essence, then drove the chi and blood in his body to quickly flow through his meridians and blood vessels, moving all the blood that had been deposited in his blood vessels for a long time back to his heart. In less than 10 minutes, all of Guhan's chi and blood had been unobstructed, and his hands and feet could move again. Bite. The first thing Guhan did after regaining the ability to move his hands was to open his dimensional pocket and toss out all the food he had prepared inside. Then, without any care for his image, he directly grabbed the rice bucket with his hands and stuffed it into his mouth. He did the same with the braised pork and vegetables. There was no need for chopsticks, he just used his hands and stuffed mouthfuls of rice and braised pork into Guhan's bottomless stomach. Ashma looked at Guhan as if she was looking at a ghost. She watched as the bucket of rice and the basin of braised pork slowly disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, it was as if Guhan did not need to chew at all as he stuffed them into his mouth and swallowed them. Meanwhile, his stomach seemed to be filled with super gastric acid that had a strong digestive effect. It quickly broke down all the food Guhan ate and transported the energy inside to all the cells in Guhan's body. There's actually such a glutton in the world. Ashima was completely stunned. She didn't know how many days Jiyu Han had been starved for him to become like a reincarnated hungry ghost. "Oh, I almost forgot. Qingpin and Etienne have been starving for 5 days as well." Guhan immediately tossed out his tent, then used his sword essence to control his food into the tent. "Miss Saintus, please leave first. My sword lady is shy and doesn't like to be seen by others when she's eating. I will repay your kindness in the future." "What is this? I'll throw it away after using it." Hearing Guhan's words, Ashma was so angry that her lips trembled. She immediately turned around and left, not wanting to see this damned man ever again. Chapter 410. It had been 12 days since Lionian Ling arrived, and it had been 7 or 8 days since most of the swordbearers arrived at the final destination. At this time, after countless failures, no one was willing to go to the boss room and ask for trouble. According to the statistics of the swordbearers, everyone roughly knew that the Yuan Ku guarding the room was not the Yuan Ku that was transformed from the memory fragments of Jendi, but a real Yuan Ku, a real meteor-level Yuan Ku. At this time, Most of the sword-bearers belonged to 7 groups according to their cities. Among them, the group from Jerusalem had the largest number of people. It was especially eye-catching when they gathered together in a vast expanse of white. The second group was the group from Buenos Aires. Like Jerusalem, they also had more than 20 people. Then came the group from Yangjing, which had about 17 or 18 people. Then came London, Berlin, Los Angeles, and Yuzhong, which had the least number of people. The sword-bearers of these cities did not gather together freely. Instead, they stood in a more orderly manner. In front of each group, there was a sword-bearer with an extraordinary temperament standing in front of them. They looked like the class monitor of a class, the leader of the city. The leader of Yangjing City was, of course, Fleeting Time Rin. The leader of London City was a 2-meter-tall man with the demeanor of a king. On the other hand, the leader of Berlin City was a girl with long hair that was even more golden than gold. Her blue eyes were filled with pride, and she was trying her best to act like a mature adult. However, it was not enough to hide her perfect Lolita face and body. However, she stood in front of a group of Germanic women who were about 1.8 meters tall. It was a very incongruous scene, but the aura of all the Germanic women was completely suppressed by the blonde girl. Instead, it became unusually harmonious. The leaders of Buenos Aires were a pair of twin siblings. The elder brother and sister stood together, arm in arm. They did not seem to care about the finish line. They just looked at each other with burning eyes. A sweet smell filled the air. Los Angeles was relatively scattered, each doing their own thing and did not seem to have their own leader. In Lungcheng, their leader, the Saintess Ashima, had not returned after the failure. Yuzhong City was very lonely. Song Yifei and Yi Wenjun stood together, while Ku Rokin stood alone on the other side, deliberately distancing himself from Song Yifei and Yi Wenjun. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Yuzhong City was not united. However, the others didn't care about Yuzhong City's opinion at all. There were only a few kittens and puppies. It seemed that Yuzhong City had really declined. Lydia, it's time for us to make a decision. The 2-meter-tall man from London kept pointing at the ground in front of him with his giant sword. We have wasted a whole 7 days here. We must make a decision immediately. Do we continue or leave? Ch. Reinhard, why are you asking me? Didn't you already make your own decision? The blonde lowly Lydia was small, but her aura was not small. Her voice was as loud as a large bell, causing the others' eardrums to hurt. Well, I've said it. I suggest we leave immediately. Don't waste any more time here. I can increase my sword essence by 500 quarks in the 7 days we've wasted here. Reinhard said heavily. It seemed that the 7 days of wasted time had made him very unhappy. Okay, I have no objection. You can leave with your people. I promise I won't stop you, Lydia said with a look of please do as you please. Lydia, everyone must leave together, Reinhard said. All the cities came in together, so naturally, we should leave together. We humans are a whole and can't be separated. Don't you think so? Who's a whole with you? I, Lydia, am Lydia, and my underlings are my underlings. Who wants to be a whole with a muscular man like you? What I mean is very clear. If you, Reinhard, want to leave, we won't stop you. However, don't think about making decisions for me, Lydia. What a joke. The man in this world who can make decisions for me, Lydia, hasn't been born yet. Hearing this, they roughly understood the situation. The sword-bearers gathered here were divided into 2 factions. One faction felt that Ice could not be defeated at all and wanted to leave. The leader was Hero King Reinhard, who was the leader of London. The other faction wanted to stay here, and the leader was Lydia. Originally, these 2 factions had nothing to do with each other. Those who wanted to stay could stay, and those who wanted to leave could leave. It would be great if they did not interfere with each other. However, Reinhard was a little petty and did not want to be at a disadvantage. He was worried that if he left, someone would really find a way to defeat the boss and then bathe in the sword ray of the king's sword. If that was really the case, then he, Reinhard, would probably have to suffer for a few years. Therefore, Reinhard wanted everyone to leave with him. That way, Everyone would not be able to bathe in the sword ray of the king's sword, and there would be no problem of being at a disadvantage. Naturally, others would not agree with Reinhard's behavior. You might not be patient, but I am. Therefore, the two sides were in a stalemate, and no one could convince the other. Messi, tell me. Should you people from Buenos Aires leave or stay here and waste time? Reinhard realized that he couldn't convince Ladia, so he tried to get help from other cities. His first target was the sword-bearer in Buenos Aires. He had a friendship with the siblings, Cristina Messi, and thought that she would be on his side. You guys fight it out. If you manage to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then Buenos Aires will follow you. Isn't that right, my dear sister Melanie? Messi did not look at Reinhard at all as he spoke. All his attention was on his sister. Miss Lionian Ling, what do you think we should do? Buenos Aires seemed to be going with the flow, so Reinhard could not say anything more. Therefore, he began to ask Lionian Ling for her opinion. What I mean is very simple. If you want to stay, then stay. If you want to leave, then leave. I will not force you. Lionian Ling's words were powerful, and Reinhard's face turned green and purple. Lionian Ling had completely rejected Reinhard's opinion. Reinhard had no choice but to ask Los Angeles and Jerusalem for their opinions. In the end, because Los Angeles did not have a leader, everyone had their own plans. There was no unified opinion at all. On the other hand, Jerusalem insisted that everything would be decided by their saintess. If the saintess wasn't around, they wouldn't express any opinions. As for Yuzhang City, Lionheart couldn't even be bothered to ask. There were only 3 people in Yuzhang City, so their opinions weren't important at all. The scene seemed to have fallen into a stalemate. No one could come up with a unified opinion. Just then, Song Ifei whispered to Yi Wenjun. Yi Wenjun took a few deep breaths, then plucked up her courage and took a step forward. In order to take this step, Yi Wenjun spent 9 days. You brat! What are you doing? Why are you moving? Can't you see that we are in a meeting? Go back and stand properly. Hearing such a sudden explosion, Yi Wenjun's hair stood on end in fright. He stood in place, trembling with fear, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. I just want to go in. I want to go in and challenge. Yin Wenjun said 3 sentences in one sentence, almost making Yi Wenjun cry. You want to go in? Just because you are a piece of trash. Ha 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 ha, I'm dying of laughter. Reinhard laughed loudly. His eyes were very sharp. He could tell that Yi Wenjun's ability was actually very bad. She was not even at the average level, let alone in this place where the elites of the sword rank gathered. Yi Wenjun was completely a piece of trash here. Phut, who do you think you are? What right do you have to control the people of Yuzhang City? Wenjun, ignore him. Go over yourself, he won't dare to do anything to you. Song Ifei rushed in front of Yi Wenjun like an old mother hen, protecting Yi Wenjun behind her. She spoke to Reinhard without showing any signs of weakness. This chick actually dares to talk back to me. So cute. Seeing Song Ifei, Reinhard's face inexplicably blushed. Then, he had a very strange feeling. We are in a meeting. As the saying goes, the minority obeys the majority. When we have a result in the meeting, you can just follow it. Now, go back and don't move without my orders. Reinhard's brain was somewhat different from ordinary people's. He seemed to think that showing his domineering side in front of a woman would make that woman like him. Enough, Reinhard, you have no right to interfere with the sword-bearers of Yuzhang City. Moreover, this trial formation was created by Yuzhang City's heaven-shrouding Jendi. No one has more right to decide this matter than Yuzhang City. Lionian Ling berated Reinhard. Did you know that Yi Wenjun is a descendant of Shrouding the Heavens? He's a direct descendant of Sword Emperor Shrouding the Heavens. What? He is from the Heaven-shrouding family? The descendant of Heaven-shrouding Jendi? Heaven-shrouding family? Someone who hasn't seen their family for hundreds of years has come out. TSK, such a weak sword-bearer. Is he really from the Heaven-shrouding family? Could he be a liar? Everyone's discussion made Yi Wenjun want to dig a hole in the ground so that he could crawl in. The descendant of the heaven-shrouding family? The master here? Reinhard revealed a happy smile. That's great. Kid from the heaven-shrouding family, if you are the master here, then you must know a way to defeat that Yuan Ku. Hurry up and tell us, so that we can all have a chance to bathe in that sword aura. It'll be a great deed for us humans. Hurry up and tell us the secret of this trial formation. Hurry up. By the end, Reinhard was no longer talking. Instead, he was shouting like a cannonball, scaring Yi Wenjun so much that her legs were trembling. She didn't even know how to walk. Ha ha ha, so it's just a coward. How can someone like him be the descendant of heaven-shrouding family? What a joke. Reinhard laughed crazily as he approached Yi Wenjun and Song Fei step by step. Kid, come, let Reinhard help you recall the secret of this trial array. Shut your mouth, he is the descendant of heaven-shrouding Jendi. Yuzhang City will not allow a pig like you to insult him. Ku Rokin suddenly stood in front of Reinhard and said word by word. Who would have thought that Ku Rokin would actually help Yi Wenjun at this time? Get out of my way. Reinhard grabbed Ku Rokin's neck, trying to shake him off. He didn't expect that Ku Rokin would move sideways and dodge Reinhard's attack. Instead, he appeared behind Reinhard and aimed at his butt, ready to kick it. You two, are you going to fight? Liuyan Ling's face was frosty. If that's the case, then I'll have to send both of you to the medical bay, and then come with me to the sword committee to explain. For a moment, the scene became extremely quiet. Because of Liuyan Ling's words, Ku Rokin and Reinhard didn't dare to fight anymore, but they both held their breaths. No one could be the first to step back. Interesting. Interesting. I didn't expect to see such an interesting scene as soon as I came back. Everyone turned their heads at the same time and looked in the direction of the voice. There, Ashima walked in, glowing. Behind Ashima, the figure of Guhan was particularly inconspicuous. Chapter 4:11. Sainters. Seeing Ashima, all the sword-bearers from Jerusalem immediately surrounded her, while Guhan quietly went to Yuzhang City's team. Guhan, you're finally back. Song Fei saw Guhan and immediately surrounded him with joy. At the same time, Yi Wenjun also came up to greet him. Liuyan Ling was naturally happy to see Guhan back. However, due to the presence of so many people in Yangjing, she could not run to Guhan's side like Song Fei. There was an accident. What happened here? Why do I feel like there's a fight going on? Ji Yuhan noticed that the sword-bearers had gathered together and sensed that something was wrong with the situation, so he immediately asked. Guhan, you have no idea. That Reinhard is too overbearing. Song Fei immediately told Guhan everything that had happened. Guhan nodded slightly. This Reinhard is also an interesting person. Interesting? He doesn't even look at us from Yuzhang City. Isn't it because we have fewer people? Song Fei said indignantly. Saintess, right? You came at the right time. Let me ask you, do you want to leave with us? Don't waste any more time. Reinhard ignored Ku Rokin behind him and directly asked Ashima, who had just arrived. Saintess, it's like this. One of Ashima's subordinates whispered in her ear. Ashima's eyes lit up as she listened, and a hint of excitement flashed across her face. You're asking for our opinion? That's interesting. Reinhard, have you asked for the opinion of the owner here? Owner? Where is the owner here? Reinhard said loudly. Isn't the person next to you the owner of this place? Ashima chuckled coldly. His Majesty Shroud Heaven built this trial by fire formation, which means this is where his descendants reside. I heard this little brother is the successor of the Shrouding Heavens clan. If he's not the owner of this place, then who is? Since we've received the blessing of the Heaven-Shrouding Sword Emperor and are fortunate enough to enter this trial array, shouldn't we respect the owner of this place? Even I, a Jerusalemite who is despised by you so-called free people, know this principle. Don't tell me that you, a dignified hero king, don't know the most basic respect for your master. How dare you shout at the owner of this place and force him to reveal his family secrets? Reinhard, you're really giving face to your London mayor. All right. Well said, Saintess. The Saintess is right. This is the truth. This Reinhard is too shameless. He actually bullied the owner of this place. Ashma's subordinates immediately began to clamor and applaud their saintess. Even the people from the other cities nodded subconsciously, tacitly agreeing with Ashma's statement. This completely embarrassed Reinhard. I just don't want everyone to waste time here. If everyone could leave this place together or find a way to enter the final point together, would I still be in such a hurry? I'm doing this for everyone's sake. Lionheart tried very hard to justify himself. As for whether or not he believed what he said, that was another matter. Young Master Yi, I heard that you wanted to enter Yuan Ku's room just now, right? Ashma had just said that Yi Wenjun was the owner of this place and everyone should respect him. These words struck a chord in Yi Wenjun's heart. This immediately made Yi Wenjun have a good impression of Ashma. He felt that this Jerusalemite's words were really nice. She must be a kind-hearted woman. Yes, I want to go in. I'm a descendant of the Yi family after all. There's no reason for me to not enter my ancestors' relic. Even if I'm destined to fail, I still want to go in and see what's going on, Yi Wenjun said firmly. However, Yi Wenjun had been very hesitant before this. He was not afraid of failure, but he was afraid that if others knew that he, as a descendant of the Yi family, failed in his ancestors' relic, it would tarnish the Yi family's reputation. That was why he did not dare to take action. However, he also felt that since he was a descendant of heaven-shrouding Jendi, perhaps the ancestor would leave him a backdoor or something. That way, even if he was the weakest among them, he would still have the highest chance of success. If he succeeded in front of the younger generation of the 8 base cities, wouldn't the heaven-shrouding family gain a lot of face? Therefore, Yi Wenjun had been in a dilemma until Reinhard encouraged everyone to leave together. Yi Wenjun was afraid that he wouldn't be able to go in and give it a try. That was why he was eager to enter the final boss room. Very well, young Master Yi, you should go in. Ashma walked in front of Reinhard. Reinhard, the owner of this room wants to go in. Are you going to stop him? Reinhard did not say anything, but it was obvious that he agreed with Ashma's words. Under Ashma's protection, Yi Wenjun finally entered the boss room. This brat looks so skinny. He'll probably be chased out by that female bear in less than 2 seconds. Reinhard predicted in disdain when he saw Yi Wenjun enter. Then, something embarrassing happened. Yi Wenjun entered for a whole minute, but he did not hear the system notification that he had failed. This brat didn't really succeed, right? Reinhard caressed his sword. None of the people present, including Reinhard, could last more than 30 seconds in the boss room. Yi Wenjun had been in there for a whole minute. He's the descendant of Zhetien Jendi. Zhetien Jendi would naturally leave a backup plan for his descendants. What's so strange about that? Let's just quietly wait for him to come out. It's best if he can bring out that Empress sword. Let us small sword wielders admire the Empress sword lady's sword light. Ashma strolled back to the middle of her people. Then, she discreetly glanced at Guhan through the veil. However, she found that he had his head lowered and seemed to be thinking about something. It was as if he had not noticed her at all. Immediately, 2 waves of anger rose in her. After waiting for about 10 minutes, when everyone thought that Yi Wenjun might have succeeded, a door opened in the space in the room and Yi Wenjun fell out. How was it? Did you obtain the Empress sword, Empress? Reinhard was the first to rush up and grab Yi Wenjun's shoulder to interrogate him. Yi Wenjun was so frightened that he kept retreating. He looked like a little chick that was caught by an eagle. If it wasn't for someone supporting his tottering body, he would probably have fallen to the ground by himself. People of London, behave yourselves. This isn't a place where you can act presumptuously. The person who spoke was Guhan. He had unknowingly appeared behind Yi Wenjun and saved him from Reinhard's clutches. Who are you? Are you also from the Zhetien family? Reinhard stared into Guhan's eyes as he asked in a low voice. Although Reinhard's actions were very arrogant, that didn't mean he was an idiot. He could feel a powerful force from Guhan's body. It was a force that even Reinhard didn't know about. I'm Yi Wenjun's friend. The Yi family head instructed me to protect Yi Wenjun and not let anyone with ulterior motives hurt him. Guhan made up a story. He had never seen Yi Wenjun's parents before, let alone been instructed by them. I don't care so much. Everyone has worked so hard to come here just to see the Emperor's sword and to look up to the Emperor's sword. Now that the Emperor's sword is in this kid's hands, he must take it out. Otherwise, no one will be able to leave. Just now, Reinhard was still forcing everyone to leave this place. In the end, it became that no one could leave at this moment. Reinhard's heart was completely focused on the Emperor's sword. There weren't many Emperor's swords in London. There was only one. Therefore, everyone in London dreamed of having an Emperor's sword in their city, even if their city's sword-bearer couldn't synchronize their city's Emperor's sword. However, if other cities' sword-bearers synchronized their city's Emperor's sword, then according to the rules between sword-bearers, no matter which city the sword-bearer originally belonged to, after synchronizing the Emperor's sword, the sword-bearer must belong to the city where the Emperor's sword was located. Therefore, every additional Emperor's sword in their base city would increase the possibility of having an Emperor's sword-bearer. How was it that Yangjing City could continuously have Emperor sword-level sword-wielders? Wasn't it because there were 5 Emperor's swords hidden in Yangjing City's sword tower? This time, Reinhard had received a death order from London City's sword committee. If there was an Emperor's sword in the trial ground, then he must bring the Emperor's sword back to London City. Reinhard had the confidence to do so because he had Long Shi, who was born and raised in London City, behind him. I didn't succeed. I didn't get the Emperor's sword either. Yi Wenjun immediately waved his hand when he heard Reinhard's words. Then, he took out a secret manual and an aquamarine knife from his dimensional pocket. I didn't beat that Yuan Ku guard, but she recognized me as a descendant of our ancestor, so she let me enter a small room. That's the reward that our ancestor left for our Yi family descendants. It's all here. I really didn't get any Emperor's sword, Yi Wenjun said in an aggrieved manner. Green silk cutter. Seeing the thing in Yi Wenjun's hand, Lionheart's entire body emitted a greedy light. This was because the dark green knife in Yi Wenjun's hand was the most precious legendary green hair cutter. Yi Wenjun's family had been in decline for too long, and she had never even seen a picture of the green hair cutter. She thought that this dark green knife was just some useless decoration, so she took it out to display. If Yi Wenjun knew it was green silk cutter, he would never have taken it out. Idiot, put it back in my dimensional pocket. Guhan patted Yi Wenjun's hand. Yi Wenjun shuddered and immediately put green silk cutter back, which made Reinhard, who had a ferocious and greedy gaze, extremely envious. If there weren't so many people gathered here and so many pairs of eyes staring at him, Reinhard might have tried to snatch it. I don't believe it. He must have hidden the Emperor's sword. Reinhard shouted. Tell me honestly, where did you hide the Emperor's sword? Reinhard, have you had enough? You're a disgrace to the people of London. Liuyan Ling walked over coldly. It's easy to find out if the Yi family descendant entered the final room. Let your men see if the female bear is still there. If she's not there, it means that the Yi family descendant succeeded. It won't be too late for you to make a fuss then. Reinhard didn't say anything because Liuyan Ling's words made sense and he couldn't refute her. Reinhard waved his hand at one of his sword bearers. You, go in and take a look. The sword bearer had no choice but to listen to Reinhard and enter the boss room. Soon, there was a failure notification. The unlucky kid failed as expected. Chapter 412. That damned female bear is still there. Reinhard's expression became more and more unsightly. Miss Liuyan Ling, since the descendants of the heaven-shrouding family are unable to reach the end, then there's no hope for us. Let's retreat together and deal with this female bear when we're ready. I've already said that the Liuyan family doesn't force others to do anything. Others can't force us to do anything either. If the City of London wants to leave, then leave. There's no need to ask me, Liuyan Ling's opinion. Similarly, the rest of us don't need to ask the City of London's opinion either. Miss Liuyan Ling, are you going to let everyone waste their time here? Reinhard still wanted to say something, but one of his subordinates suddenly shouted, Lord Reinhard, someone has entered the room again. Who is it? Didn't I say that without my permission, no one is allowed to enter the boss's room again? Reinhard shouted furiously. He saw that the man who had blocked in front of him was less than 10 meters away from the door of the room. "Idiot, did you not hear Lord Reinhard's words?" The enraged Reinhard picked up his large sword and threw it at Guhan's back. This was not a random throw, but a very precise throw. Although Reinhard looked tall and burly, his swordsmanship was not just for show. However, the swordsmanship in his hands was not just for show. A giant sword was aimed straight at Guhan's waist. If this hit connected, then half of Guhan's body would be crippled, and he would have to enter the medical pod to recuperate. Moreover, the flying speed of this sword was also extremely fast. It was clearly a weapon that was projected by the power of the hand, but it was comparable to the speed of a bullet. Faced with such a sudden attack, an ordinary sword wielder would definitely not be able to dodge it. They could only accept their fate and take the blow. If it was a disciple of an aristocratic family with excellent swordsmanship, they could only choose to immediately lie on the ground and use this method to dodge the attack aimed at their waist. However, Guhan didn't seem to notice it at all. The sword approached Guhan's waist in 1/100th of a second. When it was less than a meter away from Guhan and was about to stab into Guhan's body, there was a flash of white light, followed by a loud clang. The large sword flew straight back at the owner of the sword, Reinhard. The speed of the large sword was even faster than a bullet. Damn it! A few drops of cold sweat instantly appeared on Reinhard's forehead. He didn't even have the time to return his sword lady to the sword through the sword mark. He could only immediately jump to his left in an attempt to avoid the large sword that flew back. Never would he have thought that Reinhard, who thought he had dodged the attack by jumping, would be horrified to discover that he had judged wrongly. The tip of his great sword had already appeared less than 3 meters away from his eyes. The place where his great sword had flown back to wasn't where he had been standing, but the place where he had dodged to after jumping. At this time, Lionheart could not dodge a second time. He could only watch helplessly as his great sword stabbed towards his face. Unlike when Reinhard stabbed Guhan's waist just now, this sword was aimed at Reinhard's head. He would be finished below the waist, but he wouldn't die with the medical pod. But if his head was finished, then even the gods wouldn't be able to save Reinhard. "You only know how to cause trouble for me," muttered Liuyan Ling as she raised her Yixian sword in front of Reinhard. Reinhard's large sword collided with the Yixian sword, and after a loud bang, the large sword fell to the ground, saving Reinhard's life. "That man tried to kill me just now." Reinhard was in a daze for more than 10 seconds before he snapped out of his daze. "That man tried to kill me just now." "That's right, he tried to kill me." Liuyan Ling. Liuyan Ling, did you see that? "That man from Yuzhong City tried to kill me just now." Reinhard roared furiously, "Liuyan Ling, I demand that you use your right to arbitrate and arrest that man, and hand him over to the City of London for trial. As the #1 family in the world, the direct descendants of the sword ancestor, the Liuyan family has the unique right to arbitrate. The right to arbitrate is a supreme right that contains many rights, but we won't go into detail about the specific rights. We'll just mention one of the rights. When two swordbearers try to take each other's lives, the Liuyan family has the right to arbitrate and judge both parties." Guhan's counterattack was aimed at Reinhard's head, and it was an attack that would harm Reinhard's life. Reinhard immediately requested for Liuyan Ling to use her right to arbitrate. "Request denied," replied Liuyan Ling as she sheathed her Yixian sword. That attack may have seemed fast and powerful, but it was like an empty eggshell. There was no power in it. Even if such a sword were to hit your head, it wouldn't be able to break through the defense of your personal shield. It wouldn't even leave a mark, so how could it possibly harm your life? "Reinhard, that man had no intention of killing you. He was only trying to scare you. Look at how scared you are. How dare you talk to me about the right to arbitrate? What a joke." Fleeting Ling pursed his lips and ignored Reinhard, who was standing stiffly by his side, and returned to his team in Beijing. No one noticed that Fleeting Time's wrist was trembling uncontrollably. "Another reckless swordsman is here, you guys should." Isai's suddenly shut her mouth and stared at Guhan, who had just entered the room. "Your Excellency Military Governor, I didn't expect you to have the guts to come in again." Isai's was shocked. She did not expect Guhan to have the guts to come in again after suffering a crushing defeat. Of course. Yi Qing left everything in that room for me. I have to take back what belongs to me, said Guhan with an expressionless face. Do it, Isais. I don't want to waste my precious time on you. Ha ha ha, military governor, I didn't expect you to still be so arrogant and savage after such a long time. Do you think you're still the same person? No, even the old you couldn't have grown to a level where you could defeat me in less than 10 days. Isais roared. I'll send you back now. Once again, Isais used the strategy she used to deal with swordbearers. She appeared in front of Guhan in a flash and attempted to grab Guhan's body to pin him down again. However, the situation was different this time. Isais' spare claws missed. Guhan was no longer where Guhan was. Only 2 sword rays were left, and they landed on Isais' spare claws. The 2 sword rays were so powerful that the fat on Isais' body began to tremble like waves. That's impossible. You can actually follow my movements. Isais stared at her claws in disbelief. The attack just now had left a small mark on Isais' claws that were harder than diamonds. The mark was small, but it meant something. It meant that Guhan could now hurt the hardest part of her body. Isais, I don't know what has bewitched your mind. If you still have a little bit of IQ, get out of my way. For Yi Qing's sake, I won't make things difficult for you. Guhan's voice suddenly sounded. At this time, he was not standing on the ground, but floating in the air. Floating in the air was an ability that only swordbearers at the spirit sword level could have. Unless it was a swordswoman's own skill, swordbearers could never float in the air. Military governor, have you become a sword spirit? Seeing Guhan floating in the air, Isais was shocked. In this world, Isais was the one who understood Guhan's strength the most. She knew Guhan's strength too well. She understood that if Guhan really became a sword spirit, there would be no need to fight. She, Isais, would kneel on the ground and sing Conquer, and then offer her body. No, it's impossible. This trial array doesn't allow sword-bearers at the spirit sword level. They will be automatically expelled. Military governor, you can't become a sword-bearer at the spirit sword level, Isais said sternly. Her words were not only for Guhan to hear, but also for herself to cheer herself up. Of course I'm not a sword-bearer at the spirit sword level. In terms of sword essence, I'm still the me from 12 days ago. You can rest assured. Guhan said coldly. But since Guhan's sword essence didn't change, how did he defend against Isais' attack and float in the air? Isais carefully observed Guhan again and finally found something different. Guhan was holding 2 swords in his hands at the same time, one on the left and one on the right, holding 2 swordswomen at the same time. Yin-yang sword tactics. Isais cried out involuntarily. This is impossible. You can't practice yin-yang sword tactics. This is impossible. You recognize this is yin-yang sword tactics. Guhan floated down from his floating state. He didn't expect Isais to recognize yin-yang sword tactics at a glance. But this didn't seem strange. After all, these things were left by Zhe Tianjendi. Isais naturally could recognize yin-yang sword tactics. Military governor is military governor. Sure enough, trash like me can't challenge you. Isais' voice gradually became cold. So what if it's yin-yang sword tactics? I'll still defeat you. Chapter 413. The battle between Guhan and Isais instantly entered a white-hot state. Although Isais' body was huge, when she attacked at full speed, her body was terrifyingly agile. Every attack was as if she used flash. She would inevitably appear behind Guhan, attempting to launch a fatal attack on Guhan. No matter how she attacked, Guhan could always react in time, dodge Isais' attack at the critical moment, and launch a counterattack on Isais' body. With 2 swords in hand, Guhan's movement speed had completely changed. No matter how fast Isais was, he could always dodge Isais' attack. Even if Isais' attack speed was 3 times faster than before, Guhan's speed was also 3 times faster. What made Isais feel even more pain was that even if he couldn't attack the solid cold would always be able to attack him. Although the attack power of the two swords in Guhan's hands was not as terrifying as the increase in his attack speed, it could already break through the defense of Aisai's fur and cause a certain amount of damage to Aisai's. Although this damage was nothing in a short period of time, as time went on, Aisai's would definitely be exhausted to death by Guhan. This is impossible. This is impossible. How can you keep up with my speed? Even if you've mastered the yin-yang sword secret art, and your physical fitness has been enhanced by two sword maidens, you can't reach your current speed. It's impossible. The screen full of flashes finally came to an end, and Aisai's took the initiative to stop the close combat battle. Just as Aisai's said, Guhan's attack speed was too strange. If she did not figure out why Guhan's speed was the same as hers, she would never be able to defeat the current Guhan. Aisai's, I think you should know me very well. Can't you guess why I can keep up with your speed? Guhan stopped in the air. Aisai's gave up on attacking, and Guhan also stopped taking the initiative to attack. Let me think, let me think. Aisai's bare eyes kept turning as memories of the past flashed through her mind. Finally, when Aisai's remembered a certain little girl who forced her to catch fish every day, Aisai's finally understood. She couldn't help but take a few steps back and wet her lips with her bare tongue. I remember now. Your second sword, the Sword Maiden, is the Yuchang sword. You're using the fishbowl sword's pursuing shadow ability. Isis almost roared out this sentence. Her face was full of fear. This fear did not seem to be the fear of Guhan, but the fear of the name in her mouth. Isis, you really know my situation very well. Could it be that the future me will really travel to the past? Guhan frowned. This Aisai's even knew about the existence of the fishbowl sword. It seemed that she really knew him very well. Or rather, Zhejendi knew him very well in the past. At this time, Guhan had basically confirmed that he might have traveled to the past in the future. The past was Zhejendi's era. Only this could explain everything that happened to him. As for going back to the past, Guhan did not think that it was impossible, nor did he reject it. He knew that some Yuan Ku had items or abilities that could travel through time. It was not impossible for him to go back to the past at a certain time in the future. He was just very curious and wanted to know if the door to go back to the past was placed in front of him. If he chose not to go in, would the history of the entire world change? Guhan suddenly looked forward to the arrival of this day. He really wanted to know what kind of change would cause him to enter the past, and whether he could use this method of traveling back to the past to return to that day 12 years ago and save his parents from certain death. What? You're asking what would happen if you changed history and caused Guhan to lose something precious? For Guhan, being able to save his parents was more important than anything else. This was his only chance to complete his life's redemption. If there really was such a chance, Guhan would definitely not give it up. At this time, Guhan absolutely could not imagine how painful of a choice he would have to go through when such an opportunity was placed in front of him. Fishbowl sword. Fishbowl sword. Lady Fishbowl sword. Aisai's kept repeating these names. Seeing how lost Aisai's was, it seemed that in the past, the fishbowl sword had also left an extremely precious and unforgettable memory for Aisai's. Yuchang sword, Yuchang sword, Yuchang sword lady, they all referred to the same sword lady. That was the sword lady in Ji Yuhan's hand, the most popular sword lady in Yuzhang City. She was the most beloved sword lady in Yuzhang City. She was ranked second among the treasured swords, and also the dagger that Ji Yun left behind when she disappeared, Yuchang sword. No one would have thought that the fishbowl sword, which had disappeared for a few weeks and made all the staff of Yuzhang City's sword garret excited, would actually be such an inconspicuous little dagger in Ji Yun's hands. Yes, it was a very inconspicuous dagger. Because it was a big star in Yuzhang City, the appearance of the fishbowl sword's original body was probably deeply remembered by all the people in Yuzhang City. In their memories, the fishbowl sword was an incomparably gorgeous dagger. The hilt of the sword was inlaid with 4 long and sized gems of different colors, red, yellow, blue, and green, as well as lines that were carved with 24K pure gold. On the blade of the sword, there were words and patterns carved in ancient seal scripts that no one could understand. More importantly, almost everyone knew that the fishbowl sword emitted a blood-red radiance. This radiance represented slaughter, bravery, and decisiveness. This was a light that no one in Yuzhang City would forget. It was a light that they were proud of, a light that other sword ladies would never have. Therefore, the characteristics of the fishbowl sword were obvious. Even if it was hidden in the dark, it could not hide its dazzling light. No one in Yuzhang City would mistake it for the fishbowl sword. But Guhan did not recognize it at first. The dagger that Ji Yun had risked her life to get back from the three women was actually the fishbowl sword. Compared to the fishbowl sword in his memory, this dagger was too ordinary. It was so ordinary that it was like a simple toy dagger that a poor family would make for their child. The blade of the dagger did not have any light. It was just the color of the most ordinary iron. Even if there was light, it was the light that reflected the sun. On the other hand, her sword hilt seemed to be made from a broken table leg. It felt terrible and rough in her hand. There was not even a stone embedded in it, let alone any four-colored gems or golden threads. When a dagger like this was thrown on the ground, people's first reaction was probably not to pick it up, but to kick it away so that it would not appear in front of their eyes. This was the case with this dagger. Guhan would never have thought that this dagger was the fishbowl sword. It was not until the moment Ji Yun disappeared that Guhan saw this dagger appear in his quilt. When Ji Yun was in a stiff state in the car, the half-dagger that was inserted into her body, and in the end, Ji Yun could actually sneak into the trial formation through Qingpin's scabbard. Thinking of this, Guhan connected Ji Yun, the dagger, and the fishbowl sword together. He began to vaguely feel that this dagger was the missing fishbowl sword. When Bastet told him that Zhe Tianzhendi had hidden the last trump card that could defeat Isis in this trial formation, Guhan immediately thought of the yin-yang sword art, because only by cultivating the yin-yang sword art could it be possible to defeat the meteor stage Yuan Ku Isis. However, the yin-yang sword art had the limitation of needing two natural sword ladies of the same level to synchronize. This made Guhan want to give up, because it was absolutely impossible, unless Guhan used the grafting technique in reality and snatched the natural sword lady that was synchronizing from the hands of a swordbearer. In that case, Guhan would have an additional natural sword lady of the same level, perfectly meeting the cultivation conditions of the yin-yang sword art. But Guhan would not use that kind of sinister trick in reality, although he did use it in the game. From a certain point of view, Ji Yuhan was indeed a bastard, a bad person. But Guhan also had his own bottom line. Guhan would never sacrifice the lives of others for his own selfish desires. This was something Guhan would never do, so Guhan directly ruled out the grafting technique. Guhan, who did not intend to use the grafting technique, was at his wit's end for the cultivation of the yin-yang sword art. At this time, Guhan thought of the dagger in his arms. Guhan suspected that it was the fishbowl sword's dagger. Just as Guhan thought of the dagger, a voice inexplicably came into Guhan's ears. "Brother, I'm sorry, I made you worry about me." This voice was Ji Yun's voice, and her voice sounded in Guhan's ears. "Ji Yun, is that you? Are you talking to me?" Guhan's voice was very calm, but it could not conceal the excitement in its core. "It's me, brother. I'm really sorry. You definitely wouldn't have thought that Ji Yun is actually... I know, you're actually the fishbowl sword, right?" Guhan did not wait for Ji Yun to finish and directly said the final answer. "Yes, brother is the smartest. Yun is the fishbowl sword, and the fishbowl sword is Yun. Chapter 414. Although Guhan had already guessed that Ji Yun was the fishbowl sword, Guhan didn't want to believe it from the bottom of his heart. Not to mention why the grand fishbowl sword would have his sister Ji Yun's memories and appearance. Naturally, fishbowl sword's appearance was as widespread as her original self. Although she was about the same height and build as Ji Yun, both had the perfect Lolita body shape. However, fishbowl sword's appearance was completely different from Ji Yun's appearance. It was just like putting the Lolita Lin Miaoke and the tomboy Xu Jiao together, and it was impossible to mistake them for each other. Thus, Guhan and Ji Yun opened their hearts and communicated, and finally understood the gist of the matter. Everything happened on the day that fishbowl sword's wielder, Bai Kai, died. Bai Kai didn't really die on a prostitute's belly because of a gust of wind. The real cause of his death was actually his younger brother, Bai Jie. Fishbowl Sword and Bai Kai didn't have a good relationship because Bai Kai seemed to be a nice person who treated everyone well, and was also humorous. But in reality, Bai Kai was a person with a terrible personality. Bai Kai clearly had a wife, 3 personal maids, and more than 10 concubines. However, any woman was short-lived for Bai Kai, so he liked to go to the brothel to play with those fresh women. Bai Kai had even stolen young girls from outside the city and raped them. After raping them, he would directly kill those pitiful girls and expose their corpses in the wilderness, saying that they were killed by Yuan Ku, and no one would verify this. Every day, Yuan Ku killed countless people outside the city, and losing 1 or 2 young girls wasn't a big deal. Of course, Bai Kai did all of this behind his sword maidens' backs. When doing this, Bai Kai would put all of his sword maidens into the scabbard, mainly the fishbowl sword. Bai Chi's other 2 sword maidens were artificial sword maidens, and didn't react to anything Bai Kai did. Later, this matter was discovered, but the person who discovered Bai Chi's crime wasn't Fishbowl Sword, but Bai Chi's younger brother, Bai Jie, who was the thief who first escaped with Ji Yun and pretended to be a sword wielder. It turned out that in addition to raping and killing young girls, Bai Kai also liked to learn from Teacher Chen and record his own actions. For this, Bai Kai specially went to the auction house to buy an antique camera and an antique laptop. It seemed to be a Xiaomi brand, a famous brand from that time. Thus, Bai Chi's younger brother naturally hacked into his older brother's laptop and watched all of Bai Jie's videos, then began to extort money from his brother. Bai Kai didn't treat his family very well. It was only because of his reputation that he brought his family to live in the core area. He gave them enough to eat, but he never gave money to his family. To put it nicely, he didn't want his family to develop the habit of reaping without sowing. Therefore, Bai Jie, Bai Kai's younger brother, lived a miserable life. In fact, it was almost tragic. In addition, he had a lazy personality. After discovering his brother's big secret, he naturally thought of extorting his brother, intending to use this video to extort a large sum of money from his brother. After Bai Jie and Bai Kai laid their cards on the table, Bai Kai was naturally horrified. On one hand, he calmed his brother down, and invited him to the best brothel in Yuzhang City to play with the most beautiful prostitutes. Then, he found some gangsters and secretly paid them to kill his brother, lest his secret be exposed. Perhaps because Bai Chi's secret was discovered, he appeared to be mentally deranged, and forgot to hide these things from his sword mistress Fishbowl Sword. As a result, everything was found out by Fishbowl Sword. Thus, the climax of the whole thing broke out. Fishbowl Sword had a falling out with Bai Kai in the brothel, and said that he wanted to leave Bai Kai and report everything to the Sword Council, so that everyone would know Bai Chi's true colors. Naturally, Bai Kai was unwilling, but he knew Fishbowl Sword's character the best. He clearly understood that Fishbowl Sword, who knew the truth, would never be convinced by him to hide the truth with him. Fishbowl Sword didn't like him in the first place, and besides fighting, the 2 of them didn't even communicate normally. In order to keep his secret from being discovered, Bai Kai had no choice but to cut off the sword mark between himself and Fishbowl Sword. This way, Fishbowl Sword would enter a state of deep sleep, and who knew how many years it would be before it could synchronize again. At that time, Bai Kai would be long dead, and there would be no need to be afraid of the sword meeting. Thus, Bai Kai began to gather his sword essence, intending to forcibly shatter the sword mark in his body. But at this time, an accident happened. The gang of gangsters broke in at this time. These gangsters had only received a mission from a mysterious masked person, and knew that they had to kill a person called Bai Jie. However, the photo of Bai Jie was a bit blurry. Plus, Bai Jie and Bai Kai were brothers, so they naturally looked very similar. These gangsters foolishly thought that Bai Kai, who was cutting off the sword mark, was Bai Jie. This time, Bai Kai was in a tragedy. While he was concentrating on the self-inflicted sword mark, the gangster directly grabbed his mouth and fed him a mouthful of super poison that was colorless, tasteless, heartless, and undetectable. Even a doctor couldn't tell if it was poison or not. Bai Kai was forced into his mouth. Just like the name of this poison described, after eating this poison, there would be no symptoms of the poison at all. It would only cause symptoms of heart paralysis, which was similar to horse fever. At this time, Bai Kai was lying in the brothel. It was simply a flawless plan. After these gangsters confirmed that Bai Kai was dead, they immediately left the brothel, but they didn't know that Baichi's body had undergone an earth-shattering change. When Bai Kai was fed the colorless, tasteless, heartless, and undetectable, doctors couldn't tell if it was poison. He had already broken off more than half of the sword mark. But at this time, Bai Kai was fed the poison, and the whole process was stopped halfway. The fishbowl sword was in a very awkward state of being half-broken. Although the fishbowl sword's body had already begun to return to a state of deep sleep, its consciousness was still half awake. It was a very dangerous state. Because of Baichi's death-seeking actions, the fishbowl sword's soul had already begun to leave the sword. If this state continued, then the fishbowl sword's soul would completely leave the sword, and from then on, it would drift between heaven and earth until the moment its soul dissipated. The fishbowl sword would completely lose its soul and become a pile of scrap metal. From then on, there would no longer be a fishbowl sword maiden in the world. At this critical moment, Bai Jie suddenly appeared in his brother's room. His brother had arranged for him to go to another room, HPAY. In the end, because he got the wrong room number, he died at the hands of his own sin. Seeing that his brother hadn't come out of the room for a long time, Bai Jie rushed into Baichi's room, only to find his brother dead on the bed. Bai Jie was shocked when he saw that his brother wasn't breathing, and immediately wanted to escape. Before he left, he suddenly saw his brother's personal terminal as a sword-bearer and the fishbowl sword on the side. If there was something that Bai Jie envied his brother the most, it was undoubtedly his brother's identity as a sword-bearer and Yuzhong City's #1 sword maiden's fishbowl sword. Even though he knew that he couldn't become a sword-bearer or have the fishbowl sword after taking those things, Bai Jie still couldn't resist his greed. However, Bai Jie couldn't resist his greed. He took his personal terminal and the Yuchang sword out of Bai Kai's room and escaped. Bai Jie didn't know that he, like his brother, had a bloodline that could synchronize with the fishbowl sword. But because Bai Jie didn't have enough sword essence, even if he touched the fishbowl sword, there wouldn't be any reaction. However, the fishbowl sword's current state was very special. Because of various factors, the fishbowl sword was in a very special state. Even if it only had a little sword essence, it could synchronize with it. The moment Bai Jie's hand held the hilt of the fishbowl sword, the new synchronization was triggered. However, the fishbowl sword's current state was incomplete and chaotic. When the sword began to synchronize again, the fishbowl sword's soul had already left half of its body. This directly caused things to enter an even more bizarre state. The fishbowl sword's soul was shattered. The synchronization when the soul was half separated from the body directly shattered the fishbowl sword's original soul. The fishbowl sword instantly lost its soul, leaving only a part of its memory stored in a little spirituality. It was precisely because it had no soul that although Bai Jie triggered the synchronization, he didn't let the fishbowl sword enter his body to breed a sword mistress again. Instead, he let the fishbowl sword's blade produce an endless suction force and began to absorb the wandering spirits nearby, in other words, souls. Coincidentally, at this moment, Jiyu Yun's soul appeared beside the fishbowl sword. The fishbowl sword's suction force instantly mixed Jiyu Yun's soul together with the fishbowl sword's own spirituality and memories, sucking them all into its own body. Logically speaking, after the fishbowl sword regained its soul, it should find a body to breed a new one in. But unfortunately, a building next to Bai Jie suddenly rang with a shrill alarm. Bai Jie recognized that building. It was Yuzhong City's Unju Hall, where the ashes of the dead were stored. Bai Jie, who already had a guilty conscience over his brother's death, jumped in fright. He threw the fishbowl sword in his hand. Bai Jie's strength was quite great, and the fishbowl sword was thrown into a small river with this throw. When Bai Jie came to his senses, he hurriedly jumped into the river and began to search for the fishbowl sword he had thrown away. But it was all too late. Bai Jie could no longer find any trace of the fishbowl sword, but very unexpectedly found a naked young girl in the river. He didn't need to guess to know that this girl was Jiyu Yun, who had been saved by Qingpin. Chapter 4:15. As for why the fishbowl sword would turn into Ji Yun's body in the water, the experts of later generations, after sufficient research and scientific proof, finally concluded that the fishbowl sword must have been born from the abdominal cavity of a large fish in the river. That was why the fishbowl sword liked to eat fish so much. In response, another group of experts gave a resounding rebuttal. Damn it, since the fishbowl sword was born from the belly of a fish, then it was also the flesh and blood of a fish. How could it like to eat fish? This was illogical. Therefore, as for why the fishbowl sword turned into Ji Yun's body after being thrown into the river, there had always been different opinions, and no definite conclusion had been reached. Bai Jie found Ji Yun and wanted to bring her back to his house to do that kind of thing. In the end, he was discovered by Qingpin halfway, and after a series of twists and turns, Ji Yun was brought home by Guhan. After losing the fishbowl sword's body, the sword element in her body was lacking, and she fell into a coma. It wasn't until Guhan absorbed a large amount of dimensional crystals for her that the fishbowl sword woke up. According to the fishbowl sword, when it first woke up, its body was completely controlled by Ji Yun's soul. Although Ji Yun vaguely felt that her body was no longer a normal human's body, she didn't know about the fishbowl sword's existence, and only thought that she had come back from the dead. Later, on the day Ji Yuhan set off from Yuzhang City, Ji Yun, who was in the recreation room, suddenly sensed the existence of her real body. She immediately rushed over to find her real body. That was how Ji Yuhan snatched the dagger from the three girls. Later, Guhan guessed that the fishbowl sword's body must have floated along with the water, and was finally picked up by the three girls. After finding her body, Ji Yun immediately understood her situation. She knew that she was actually the fishbowl sword's sword mistress, but due to various unforeseen events, she lost her body and became human. In fact, at this time, Ji Yun had two choices. One was to give up becoming a sword mistress, so that she could stay by her brother's side as a human. The other was to insert the fishbowl sword's body into her body and turn her back into a sword mistress. Originally, Ji Yun was in a dilemma between these two choices. Her human nature made her resist becoming a sword maiden, but the sword maiden spirituality kept tempting her to stab the Yuchang sword into her body. It was not until that day when Guhan went to rescue Yuanjun that Ji Yun saw with her own eyes how her brother fought. She suddenly had a desire to become her brother's helper and not his burden. Once this desire was born, Ji Yun's fate of turning back into the fishbowl sword could not be reversed. Before Guhan could return to the car, Ji Yun directly stabbed the fishbowl sword into her stomach. Ji Yun needed a lot of time to fuse with the original body, so Ji Yun began to live as a zombie for a few days. It was not until Guhan arrived at Chongyang Mountain and was about to enter the training formation that the fusion came to an end. Ji Yun also persuaded her good friend, Qingpin, to secretly stay in the same scabbard as Qingpin and sneak into the training formation. But Ji Yun didn't know that she hadn't completely fused with the original body. She was only halfway through the fusion process, and the fishbowl sword still needed to be inside Ji Yun's body to fuse with her soul. After a few days in the training formation, the fusion finally came to an end. The fishbowl sword that had fused with Ji Yun's soul returned to its original appearance as a dagger. But after going through so many twists and turns, the fishbowl sword's original appearance had also undergone a world-shaking change. From the original fishbowl sword that looked full of slaughter, magnificence, and blood, it had become an ordinary whiteboard dagger that looked like a child's toy. When the fishbowl sword, or rather, Ji Yun, finished narrating her experiences, Guhan sat on the ground in a daze for a long time. He had never thought that Ji Yun and the fishbowl sword would go through so many twists and turns, such a complicated experience, and become like this. Guhan didn't know whether or not he should accept the fact that his little sister had become a sword mistress. Logically speaking, Guhan couldn't accept it. He wanted Ji Yun to be his little sister, a human, and not a sword mistress. But in reality, Ji Yun was already a sword mistress, and Guhan had to accept this fact. At the same time, Guhan's heart was filled with vexation. He'd actually always suspected that Ji Yun wasn't his little sister, and that she was a spy sent by someone else with ulterior motives. Hadn't the fishbowl sword and his little sister's soul fused at the same time that he was paying respects to his parents and little sister in Unju Hall? Hadn't the alarm by Jie heard from Unju Hall come from the explosion of his parents' cinerary urns? It must have been at that time that Jiyu Yun's soul escaped from Unju Hall and then was absorbed by the Yuchang sword. In this way, everything could be explained clearly and clearly. The fishbowl sword was his little sister, and his little sister was the fishbowl sword. From now on, Jiyu Yun and the fishbowl sword would fuse together and become a sword mistress. What Guhan didn't know was that this coincidence had led to an unprecedented feat in human history. A human's soul could actually fuse with a sword mistress's body and become a true sword mistress. This discovery was so important that it could completely change the human world. Of course, the current Guhan didn't care about this. Even if he knew, he would hide it deeply until he had enough power to decide his own fate. Only then would he announce his little sister's identity. Before that, he would make his little sister his sword mistress. That's right, making his little sister his sword mistress was something that Guhan had to do. Guhan definitely couldn't accept his little sister becoming another man's sword mistress. He had finally reunited with his little sister with great difficulty, and he had to stay with Jiyu Yun forever. Unless Jiyu Yun found a man she liked one day, otherwise, Guhan definitely wouldn't let go of Jiyu Yun. Guhan didn't think that if Jiyu Yun really became his sword mistress, then before he died, she wouldn't fall in love with another man. Otherwise, it would be a tragedy where they could never be together. Some readers might ask, didn't Guhan already coordinate the heavenly sword? How did he coordinate the fishbowl sword? This wasn't logical. I don't know if everyone still remembers how Guhan snatched the Yu King Gojian sword from Kunzu in his darkest state at the beginning of the book. That's right, it was the sword mistress grafting technique. It was Jiyu Han's first time using the grafting technique. Although Jiyu Han felt a little guilty, he still felt that his actions were necessary. He had no other choice. He wouldn't hurt anyone else. However, that was in the game. This time, Guhan discovered that he could use the grafting technique in real life. The fishbowl sword at this moment perfectly met the requirements of the grafting technique. The grafting technique's requirements were that the sword mistress had already nurtured a sword infant, but it was still a step away from becoming a complete form. Therefore, when Guhan used the grafting technique for the first time, he couldn't wait for the Yu King Gojian sword to come out of the fleeting year calendar's belly. Instead, he had to forcefully break open the fleeting year calendar's belly and extract the Yu King Gojian sword infant to complete the synchronization. To put it simply, he had to seize the sword infant before the sword mistress established a complete connection with the Yu King Gojian sword. This time, the fishbowl sword didn't stay in by Jie's belly at all. It only borrowed a bit of by Jie's bloodline power to start the synchronization. Although Jiyu Yun had transformed into a physical body, her main body wasn't in her body, so she couldn't establish a connection with other Yu King Gojian sword. Only when her main body completely fused with her did Jiyu Yun return to a normal sword mistress and establish a connection with other Yu King Gojian sword. This was the best state to use the grafting technique. At this time, Jiyu Han only needed to inject the sword essence in his body into Jiyu Yun's body, and he would be able to synchronize with Jiyu Yun's body, obtaining an additional sword maiden of the innate artifact sword level, and thus being able to cultivate the incomparably powerful yin-yang sword technique. However, when Guhan held the fishbowl sword's hilt, Guhan hesitated again. Once the sword essence was injected, Jiyu Yun would really become his sword maiden. Would the relationship between him and Jiyu Yun be that of a brother and sister, or a sword wielder and sword maiden? How would he face Jiyu Yun in the future? These were all questions that Guhan was hesitating about and conflicted about. More importantly, once he used the grafting technique, even if Guhan didn't hurt anyone or did anything deliberately, fate would send the fishbowl sword to his doorstep. But once he used it, he still couldn't change the fact that Guhan had used a crooked technique. The grafting technique wasn't a good thing, it was full of evil in itself. It didn't matter in the game, but who knew if it would bring misfortune in the future if he used it in real life? More importantly, Guhan had sworn that he would never use the grafting technique in real life. This was Guhan's principle. Once he injected the sword essence into the hilt, all of Guhan's vows would become a joke. Big brother, what are you hesitating for? Big brother, don't you want Ji Yun anymore? Ji Yun urged in Guhan's ear. It was because of this urging that Guhan finally made up his mind to inject his sword essence into the hilt of the fishbowl sword without hesitation. What a joke! His sister wanted to be with him forever, and as her brother, he couldn't reject her. In the eyes of future generations, a great era had begun. More than half of the main characters of this era would stay in the belly of Changyang Mountain, and the world would change because of them. As for whether this change was good or bad, nobody knew. Chapter 4:16. The Sword Maiden grafting technique, as the name implied, was to break a branch from a pear tree and plant it on an apple tree. Although it could also survive with the support of the apple tree's roots and bear fruit with the advantages of both apples and pears, the pears growing on the apple tree were rootless duckweeds. However, the pear growing on the apple tree was a rootless duckweed. If one day, the wind blew the radar and broke the grafting technique, the apple tree could continue to live, but the pear branch would be dead. It was the same for the sword mother grafting method. Although it was the same as other sword mothers, it only relied on the synchronization and coordination of a single sword element. Not to mention the sword nascent soul in the Purple Mansion, there wouldn't even be a little bit of special change. Moreover, there wouldn't be any sword mark in the Purple Mansion of the wielder. If there was any change, the sword mother would be the first one to suffer. This was one of the reasons why Guhan hesitated to graft the Yuchang sword. However, when Guhan poured the sword element in his body into the Yuchang sword and synchronized it with the Yuchang sword unexpectedly drilled into Guhan's body and entered his Zifu. This change shocked Guhan. Could it be that the Yuchang sword was petrified like the other sword maidens and synchronized with it? However, although the Yuchang sword had entered Guhan's body showed no signs of petrification. Instead, his body became more and more spirited. Ji Yuhan immediately entered into the state of inner vision, and submerged his spiritual consciousness into his Zifu, and saw an amazing scene in his Zifu. At this time, there were 3 sword maidens' sword marks in Guhan's Zifu. One was the Qingpin sword, which was the most at ease. The other sword stayed in the center of the Zifu and silently watched the other 2 sword maidens fight. Yes, the other 2 sword maidens were fighting. The Yuchang sword that had entered Guhan's body was fighting with the heavenly sword mark that was originally in Guhan's Zifu. The Yuchang sword seemed to want to occupy a place in Guhan's body, but the heavenly sword's reaction was very fierce. She did not want to let the Yuchang sword stay there. The 2 sword ladies were entangled with each other, and they were in conflict with each other. When Ji Yuhan's divine sense entered the Purple Palace, the 2 swords were about to fight. The swords of both sides were constantly colliding with each other in the Purple Palace, from one end of the Purple Palace to the other, and then back again. The fight was very intense, and both of them were really angry, and they began to use all of their strength to fight. Seeing this situation, Guhan's divine sense was burning with anxiety. If they continued to fight, not only would one of the 2 sword maidens be injured or even die. What was even more frightening was that if his Zifu was destroyed by the sword marks, then his life would be over. The Zifu was something that could not be healed by any medical chamber. The Zifu was a very mysterious place. A person's spirit could sense it and even see it, but no equipment could detect it. Therefore, some people speculated that the Zifu was the place where the human soul, spirit, and body met. It was the most important place for humans, and fighting in this place was the most fatal thing. As mentioned before, the reason why a sword wielder couldn't coordinate with 2 innate sword ladies of the same level was because the sword marks of the innate sword ladies of the same level would instinctively repel each other, just like the human body's rejection reaction. Once the sword marks of 2 innate sword ladies of the same level entered the Zifu, the sword wielder would basically die. Originally, Guhan thought that he could avoid this result by using the grafting technique to obtain the Yuchang sword. This was because the sword maidens obtained through the grafting technique would not form sword marks in the body. However, he never expected that the Yuchang sword would actually enter Guhan's body and cause this battle with the heavenly sword mark. Ji Yun, Yi Tian, can you hear me? Hurry up and stop. Do you want to kill me? Helplessly, after Guhan's divine sense entered the Zifu, he did not have any combat strength. He could only watch as the two sword maidens or sword marks fought in his body. Guhan could only try to communicate with the two of them and resolve this battle. Big brother, I don't want to fight with big sister Yi Tian. Yuna only wants to leave her sword mark in the Zifu, but big sister Yi Tian is chasing Yuna. Yuna can only resist. Ji Yun did not say anything, but a thought flew into Guhan's divine sense, allowing Guhan to understand Ji Yun's meaning. Don't look for this heroine. This heroine also doesn't want to fight with your sister. However, I can't control the sword mark at all. It has already completely broken away from my control. If you don't believe me, try controlling it yourself. Yi Tian also sent a thought over, saying that she couldn't control the sword mark and that everything was moving on its own. The sword mark was a mark that the sword maiden used her own soul and the sword maiden's body to leave in the sword wielder's body. It was an important way to help connect the sword maiden and the sword wielder. The sword wielder could also use the sword mark to increase the sword maiden's combat strength. The sword mark was not only controlled by the sword maiden. The control of the sword mark was in the hands of both the sword wielder and the sword maiden. If one had to compare, then the sword wielder's control over the sword mark should be above the sword maiden's. This was because the sword wielder could use the sword mark to issue orders to the sword maiden, but the sword maiden could not do this. Therefore, in theory, Guhan's control over the sword mark should be above the heavenly sword. Guhan tried to use his divine sense to control the heavenly sword's sword mark to stop its attack on the fishbowl sword. However, the heavenly sword's sword mark simply didn't listen to any of Guhan's commands. It chased after the fishbowl sword with all its might, wanting to fight to the death. This time, Guhan was truly helpless. He watched as the battle between the two sides became more and more intense. It looked like his purple palace was about to be destroyed in the hands of these two madmen. Yun, leave this place. Please, Yun, leave Big Brother's purple palace first. Guhan couldn't control the heavenly sword, so he could only ask Ji Yun to leave his purple palace. Because it seemed that the fishbowl sword's body had entered Guhan's purple palace, the control of the body was still in Ji Yun's hands. In other words, as long as Ji Yun left this place, this battle that could endanger Guhan's future and life could end here. Big brother, don't you want to be with Yun forever? When Ji Yun heard Guhan's command, her heart trembled. A flaw appeared in her control over the fishbowl sword, and she was hit by the heavenly sword again and again. In an instant, she fell into a disadvantageous position. Of course I want to be with Yun. When you two left me 12 years ago, I swore that I would rather lose my life in exchange for you two returning to my side. But Yun, even if you leave Big Brother's purple palace, you can still stay by Big Brother's side. However, if Big Brother's purple palace is destroyed by you two, Big Brother's life will be over, Guhan explained very sorrowfully. Is that so? Yun's struggle will cause Big Brother to lose his life. The fishbowl sword came to a sudden realization. In the end, it was once again hit by the heavenly sword many times. I'm sorry Big Brother, Yun doesn't know about these things. Yun will leave Big Brother's purple palace right now. The fishbowl sword dodged the heavenly sword's attacks and flew towards the edge of the purple palace, preparing to leave Guhan's purple palace. Thank goodness Yun is sensible. Guhan let out a sigh of relief. As long as the fishbowl sword leaves his purple palace, everything will return to normal. Seeing that the Yuchang sword was about to fly out of the range of his Zifu, Ji Yuhan silently felt that the Yuchang sword's attitude was so resolute that there was even a feeling of life and death, like the wind was rustling and the water was cold. No. I absolutely can't let the fishbowl sword leave my purple palace. This thought suddenly popped up in Guhan's heart. He didn't understand why he would have such a thought, but Guhan knew that once Ji Yun left his purple palace, he might lose his little sister forever. Yun, stop. Yun, I won't allow you to leave this place. Guhan's intuition had saved Guhan many times, so this time, Guhan still chose to believe in his intuition. He frantically transmitted his thoughts to Ji Yun, hoping that she would stop. No, brother, Yun can't watch you die. Everything is Yun's fault. Let Yuna redeem everything. When Ji Yun heard Guhan's words, she walked even more resolutely. She was about to leave the range of the Purple Palace and return to the outside world. I won't allow you to leave. In the Purple Palace, Guhan didn't have any fighting strength, but he had another privilege. Because this was Guhan's Purple Palace, Guhan's divine sense could instantly appear anywhere in the Purple Palace. It didn't even need a billionth of a second, it was the true meaning of zero-time difference teleportation. Guhan's divine sense instantly appeared in front of the fishbowl sword, using his own divine sense to block the path of the fishbowl sword. Brother. Ji Yun realized that her brother's divine sense was blocking the path, so she immediately braked, abruptly stopping the rapidly moving fishbowl sword. The fishbowl sword was an external object. Once it pierced Guhan's divine sense, it would cause great damage to Guhan's spirit. Guhan might become an idiot or a vegetable, so Ji Yun had to stop. She would never let her brother suffer even a little bit of harm. Ji Yun couldn't bear to hurt Guhan, but the heavenly sword scar that was chasing after Ji Yun was not necessarily the same. The heavenly sword scar, which was instinctively controlled, took advantage of the moment when the fishbowl sword suddenly stopped, and abruptly hit the body of the fishbowl sword. Ah! Ji Yun let out a blood-curdling scream, cracks appeared on the blade of the fishbowl sword, and she was instantly seriously injured. What was even more frightening was that because it was hit by the heavenly sword scar, the originally stopped fishbowl sword once again moved forward, piercing into Guhan's divine sense. A pain that felt like 1,000 Jin hammer had smashed into his head engulfed Guhan's consciousness. The fishbowl sword stab was extremely serious, and the entire blade had pierced through Guhan's divine sense. What would happen if a watermelon was pierced by a watermelon knife? It was very simple. The entire watermelon would split into two. Guhan's divine sense, which had been pierced, was the same. The divine sense, which was originally like a ball of light, began to slowly split, just like a watermelon that had been split into two. Brother. Ji Yun let out a heart-wrenching cry. She had never thought that there would be a day when her sword would pierce through her brother's divine sense. What was the difference between this and personally killing her brother? On the other side, even though Guhan's divine sense had begun to split, the heavenly sword scar did not plan on stopping. It continued to attack the fishbowl sword in a frenzy, attempting to completely shatter it. This action completely infuriated Ji Yun, and she sank into a frenzy of rage. She pulled her sword out from Guhan's divine sense and immediately launched a desperate attack at the heavenly sword scar like a mad tiger. This attack was not the same as the previous battle where she held back. Under the stimulation of Guhan's divine sense splitting, Ji Yun let go of all her hands and feet. She let go of all her apprehensions and began to fight with her life on the line against the heavenly sword scar. It was a battle where only one of them would survive, or rather, they would all die together. At the same time, Guhan's divine sense entered a state of unconsciousness. Boundless darkness enveloped Guhan, and Guhan felt as if he had returned to the darkest moment of his life 12 years ago. Chapter 417. It's over. I can't feel Guhan's consciousness anymore. Qingpin's sword scar, which had been watching from the sidelines, inexplicably turned for the worse. Guhan's consciousness had been split in two by the fishbowl sword, and the furious fishbowl sword had begun to fight Yi Tian Sheng to the death. Qingpin could no longer watch calmly, and the entire sword scar began to shake violently. As it shook, it muttered to itself, "Hey, hurry up and come out. What are you doing? Don't you know that every second I come out wastes a day's worth of accumulation? Last time I helped you clean up the mess, I wasted a full 5 years of accumulation. I'm not going to do this unprofitable business." Although the voice also came from Qingpin's body, it wasn't the voice of a cute little girl like Qingpin. It was more like a 17 or 19-year-old girl's voice. If Guhan could hear this voice, he would definitely react. Isn't this young girl Qingpin's voice? There's no time, hurry up and save Guhan, he's about to die, the cute Qingpin said anxiously with a sobbing tone. At this time, most of Guhan's consciousness had already been split apart, and only a small part of its tail was still connected. As time passed, this last bit of connection continued to decrease. Once the consciousness was completely separated, Guhan would become a complete idiot. How did this lowly mortal become like this? The young girl Qingpin was also stunned. She looked at the situation in the Purple Palace, and immediately became angry. Is this stupid mortal a fool? He can actually control two natural sword maidens of the same level at the same time. If he wants to die, he should go to the Antarctic Sea and bury himself. That way, he'll die more quickly. Don't say any more, hurry up and save Jiyu Han. Guhan is really going to die. The cute Qingpin pleaded. No, I don't care about him. He asked for it. Why should I save him? The young girl Qingpin firmly refused. Don't worry, he won't die. At worst, he'll just become a vegetable. As long as his body is still alive, that's enough. It can also save me a lot of trouble. No, Qingpin has to save him. Qingpin must save him. I know, you must have a way to save him, right? From the cute Qingpin's choking voice, it could be seen that Qingpin had already cried, and he was crying very sadly. I won't save him. If I save him, all my efforts for 100 years will be for naught. I will never save him. Hearing the cute Qingpin crying, the young girl Qingpin hesitated for a while and finally rejected the cute Qingpin again. Alright, if you don't want to save him, I'll go save her. The Qingpin's sword mark suddenly shook and then began to move, flying rapidly towards the location of Guhan's consciousness. Stop, you idiot. What are you trying to do? The young girl Qingpin panicked. I don't want to do anything. I just want to save Guhan. I want to forcefully break the seal and heal Guhan's consciousness. The cute Qingpin cried. You're crazy. If you forcefully break the seal, both of us will be finished. We'll have to go back to that damned sword burial ground for a few 100 years. No, you idiot, you can't do that. You'll get us killed. The young girl Qingpin was also a little crazy. What was going on? Was that damned Guhan so important? Unfortunately, just like the young girl Qingpin firmly rejected the cute Qingpin's request, the cute Qingpin also ignored the young girl Qingpin's words. He wholeheartedly wanted to fly to the side of Guhan's consciousness without a trace of hesitation. Alright, I know. Stop, I'll go save him. Even the stupidest person would come up with the right compromise after comparing a few 100 years with 100 years. The young girl Qingpin was finally subdued by the cute Qingpin's stubbornness and said reluctantly, What a wastrel. The young girl Qingpin muttered. Then, two golden rays of light shot out from the sword mark of Qingpin's sword and shone on Guhan's consciousness. This caused the last bit of Guhan's consciousness that was still connected to it to finally break apart. As the golden rays of light continued to shine, Guhan's consciousness gradually began to reform. In the end, the consciousness that was almost split in half finally gathered back into its original ball of light. However, Guhan's consciousness did not recover. There was still a crack in the middle of the consciousness that could be seen with the naked eye. Once the golden light that protected Guhan's consciousness disappeared, Guhan's consciousness would probably split again. At this moment, a dark green thing shot out from the sword mark of Qingpin's sword. It was different from the light from before. This dark green thing did not look like light, but more like a semi-solidified latex. Once this dark green latex came into contact with Guhan's consciousness, it was like water meeting a sponge. It was directly absorbed by Guhan's consciousness. With the injection of the dark green latex, the crack in Guhan's consciousness also began to heal. It seemed that very soon, Guhan's consciousness would be completely restored. What bad luck! The treasure that I obtained with great difficulty is gone just like that. Seeing the dark green latex disappear from Guhan's consciousness, the young girl Qingpin's heart was filled with heartache. Where would she find such a good thing in the future? Guhan. That's great. Watching Guhan's consciousness return to normal, the adorable girl Qingpin's heart calmed down. The entire sword mark of Qingpin's sword also calmed down, no longer restless like before. What's so great about it? If these two stupid women did not stop fighting, I'm afraid that this Zifu would not be able to live past today. The young girl Qingpin sneered, You go tell you sausage, just say that the human's consciousness has already been cured, and let her quickly leave Zifu. Otherwise, all of us will be finished. But, in this way, isn't you sausage dead? The adorable girl Qingpin was stunned for a moment. Although she had only been together with Jiyu Yun for a week or two, the two lolis also had an unpleasant history of fighting over Guhan's embrace. But the adorable girl Qingpin had become friends with Jiyu Yun in the end. Thinking that her friend was about to die, Qingpin's heart was naturally extremely reluctant. Jiyu Yun's body was not bred from a human's Zifu. Her body is not complete, and she must leave a sword mark in a human's Zifu to nourish herself. Therefore, Jiyu Yun abandoned her original body, and forcibly entered Guhan's Zifu, hoping to reconstruct her body, and patch up the final hole. If you let Jiyu Yun leave Guhan's Zifu now, then not only would Jiyu Yun not be able to nourish her body, but she would also lose her original body, and her body and mind would be destroyed. What does that have to do with us? The young girl Qingpin didn't care about Jiyu Yun's death. I have already lost 100 years of effort. Do you still expect me to lose another 1,000 years to save this fishbowl sword? If you continue to be willful, I don't mind annihilating you. At worst, I'll go to the sword burial zone for another 500 years. The adorable girl Qingpin was silent. She knew that the young girl Qingpin was not joking. She had forced her a moment ago, and it had already made her angry. She only agreed to save Guhan's life because she was unwilling to part with her 500 years of effort. As for the remaining fishbowl sword, it was impossible for her to make a move. Jiyu Yun, I've already restored Guhan's consciousness. Hurry, hurry, hurry up and leave this place. The adorable girl Qingpin choked on her words 3 times before she finally said them. Hearing this, Jiyu Yun turned her head and looked in Guhan's direction. Sure enough, she saw that Guhan's consciousness had already been restored. Her violent emotions instantly disappeared, and all that was left was her endless love for her brother. I understand, I'll leave now. Goodbye. Jiyu Yun no longer tangled with Yi Tian. She took 2 slashes from Yi Tian, and at the cost of a few more cracks on her body, she once again flew towards the edge of the Zifu. Once she flew out of the Zifu, what awaited Jiyu Yun would be the destruction of her body and mind. Goodbye, big brother. Jiyu Yun is already satisfied to be able to be with you for so long. Goodbye, big brother. We won't see each other in our next lives. 2 drops of tears suddenly seeped out of the fishbowl sword's hilt. In this world, no one had ever seen the appearance of the sword lady's actual body crying. This scene was so poignant, yet so heart-wrenching. Everyone who saw this scene would sigh endlessly. The so-called tragedy was nothing more than this. Unfortunately, our story is not a tragedy. At least, it won't be a tragedy here. When the fishbowl sword was about to leave the Zifu, Guhan's consciousness suddenly moved. From Guhan's consciousness, 2 streaks of dark green latex shot out. It was the same latex that had just healed Guhan's consciousness. From the looks of it, the 2 streaks of dark green latex shot out by Guhan weren't as much as the one shot out by Qingpin. It seemed like Guhan's consciousness had used up a lot of this latex. However, the remaining dark green latex was enough to save the fishbowl sword. The latex shot out by Guhan split into 2, one flew towards the fishbowl sword, while the other flew towards the heavenly sword in the fishbowl sword. The 2 latex hit their targets at the same time, completely wrapping up the 2 sword ladies' sword scars like steamed buns. The green latex was the skin, and the sword scars were the filling. When the green latex completely wrapped up both sides, the heavenly sword still wanted to attack the fishbowl sword, but something miraculous happened. The 2 sword maidens suddenly began to approach each other. It wasn't their blades that approached each other, but their hilts that approached each other. I don't know if everyone has seen this kind of weapon before. They were originally 2 swords, but as long as the tips of the sword hilts were pushed together, then with a light rotation, the 2 swords would become a double-headed sword. At this moment, the heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword were in such a state. The dark green latex seemed to form a kind of adhesive, gluing the fishbowl sword and the heavenly sword's hilt together in the purple palace, becoming a double-headed sword. Like this, it was impossible for the heavenly sword to attack the fishbowl sword, just like how a dog would never be able to bite its own tail. Jiyu Yun, hurry up and leave your sword scars. Reconstruct your fleshly body, hurry. Jiyu Yun, who was in a daze because of her own state, suddenly heard Guhan's instructions. Although she didn't understand why, she still quickly acted. A small egg-like object flew out of the fishbowl sword's body, then floated in Guhan's purple palace, and quickly began to develop abnormally. In an extremely short period of time, the ovum turned from a small ball into an infant with 4 limbs and distinct facial features. After the infant finished developing, it immediately flew out of the purple palace. Just like a normal sword maiden, it would once again change into the appearance of a sword maiden outside the purple palace. The only thing left in the purple palace was the fishbowl sword's sword scar, which was similar to the heavenly sword's conjoined twins. Chapter 4:18. The heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword scars were connected in a very strange way. Although the heavenly sword scars still had the urge to destroy the fishbowl sword scars, an iron rod would never be able to touch its buttocks without an external force. At most, it would only spin on the spot. As a result, the heavenly sword scars and the fishbowl sword scars existed in harmony. This was something Guhan had never expected. For Guhan, what he just experienced was truly a reincarnation from the gates of hell. In the darkness, Guhan could even sense the summoning of an unknown space. A warm current pulled Guhan's soul back. His divine sense solidified once more, and Guhan's consciousness was restored. The moment Guhan's consciousness recovered, Guhan saw the fishbowl sword, which was trying to escape from the purple palace for the second time in hopes of sacrificing its life to save Guhan. Guhan had originally wanted to use the old-fashioned method to stop the fishbowl sword, but at that moment, Guhan suddenly heard a voice. The voice told him that the liquid in Guhan's divine sense could save the fishbowl sword and the heavenly sword. Only then did Guhan realize that his divine sense had inexplicably gained a warm, dark green latex. It was this latex that had just saved Guhan from the brink of life and death. Guhan made a prompt decision and followed the mysterious voice's instructions. He split the dark green latex in his divine sense into 2 parts and poured them into the heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword. This led to the scene that had just happened. With the help of the mysterious power of the dark green latex, Guhan had finally harmonized the 2 irreconcilable sword scars. He had solved a problem that no one had ever been able to solve before. He now had 2 natural sword ladies of the same level. As for the mysterious voice that had helped Guhan and the latex that had restored Guhan's divine sense, it wasn't as if Guhan was completely clueless. This was because this voice sounded extremely similar to Yi Qing's voice. It was as if it was being broadcasted from a loudspeaker. Guhan gently stroked the dark green ring on his finger as he muttered to himself. "Was it your arrangement that saved me again? Yi Qing, how much do I owe you?" It had to be explained that Ji Yuhan had a huge misunderstanding. He thought that the green latex, the mysterious voice, and even the power that had healed his consciousness had come from the same place. They had been arranged by the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor. Guhan didn't know that what really saved him was Qingpin's sacrifice, because when Qingpin did all that, Guhan was in endless darkness. Due to various reasons, Guhan had such a small misunderstanding. What would be the consequences of this misunderstanding in the future? All of this is a puzzle that no one knows. Alright, all of the problems seem to have been solved perfectly. Ji Yun had completely become a real sword maiden, and all the hidden dangers had been resolved. She could be with Guhan forever, and the obstacle that had been blocking her from cultivating the yin-yang swordsmanship was also gone. Everything seemed to be perfect for Guhan to be able to cultivate the superb swordsmanship that was comparable to the 100 million swords technique of the Liunyan family. However, there were still repercussions. In other words, Guhan had a huge hidden danger, and that was what to do with his famed sword maiden. The reason why the sword maiden grafting technique could ignore the rule that one could only have 1 sword maiden per level was because the sword maiden created by the sword maiden grafting technique didn't need to have a sword mark, so it didn't take up space in the Purple Palace. However, the sword mark of the Yuchang sword had already entered Guhan's Purple Mansion, which meant that the sword maiden grafting technique had failed halfway. When Guhan had 10,000 quark sword elements, it was a big question mark whether he could synchronize with the famed sword maiden. If this caused Guhan to be unable to synchronize with the famed sword maiden, what would happen to the King of Yu in the game? These were all huge problems. Unfortunately, It was impossible to find the answers to these problems in a short period of time. As such, Guhan decided to put these headache-inducing problems aside for now, and think about it when he had to face it. Once upon a time, Guhan hated this kind of negative way of dealing with things, but when things really happened to him, Guhan sadly discovered that it was the only way to deal with it. Guhan's consciousness returned to his brain, and he regained control of his body. He saw the naked Ji Yun lying in front of him. There was not a single blemish, scar, or hair on her body. Her jade-like body was laid out in front of Guhan. The blood in Guhan's body naturally reacted, and it was an extremely strong reaction. It was as if he wanted to transform into a wolf. "Damn it, this is your blood sister, you bastard." Guhan cursed himself in his heart. However, he also knew that this couldn't be blamed on him. This was a disaster caused by the 3 green lotus swords. Guhan sucked in a breath of cold air. He took out a set of Ching Pin's underwear from his dimensional pocket and placed it on Ji Yun, intending to help her put on the clothes. He didn't want to be attracted by his own blood sister's body, and do something absolutely absurd. In the end, when Ji Yun opened up a pair of underwear facing the little bear's head and prepared to put it on Ji Yun, a situation that made people's blood boil even more. If he wanted to put on Ji Yun's underwear, he would naturally have to pry open Ji Yun's legs. Once he did, he would naturally be able to see the absolute domain between her legs. For Guhan, who was currently experiencing the effects of the 3 green lotus swords, this was no different from a heavy bomb. Guhan only cast a careless glance, and then immediately turned around. He used his will to continuously suppress his body, and only then did he suppress the explosive desire. "Big brother, what are you doing?" At this time, Ji Yun woke up. She saw that Guhan's back was facing her, and his body was continuously trembling. He was also dripping with sweat, so she asked in a very strange manner. "Big brother is getting you some clothes. You can put these clothes on yourself." Guhan let out a long sigh of relief. Alright, Ji Yun had woken up. She could put on her own clothes, and he wouldn't have to torture himself anymore. "No, I want Big Brother to help me put them on." Unexpectedly, Ji Yun directly threw herself into Guhan's arms. Such a cute little sister wants Big Brother to help her put on her clothes. "You won't refuse, right?" Ji Yun remembers that when we were young, Big Brother said that he liked to help me put on clothes the most. Guhan was speechless. He shut his eyes tightly, deeply afraid that if he looked at her one more time, he wouldn't be able to control his body's desire. "You're so annoying. Big brother pervert, you wouldn't have any bad thoughts about your own blood sister, would you?" Ji Yun seemed to have smelled something, or perhaps she felt something hard between Guhan's crotch. She asked with a smile. "Nonsense, put on your own clothes." Guhan threw away the clothes in his hands and ran to another corner of the room, leaving Ji Yun, who had thrown the clothes on the ground, to sulk. "This is the fishbowl sword." Guhan held the original fishbowl sword in his hand. After another incubation, the fishbowl sword didn't return to its original appearance. It still had the appearance of a white dagger. It seemed that the fishbowl sword of the past could no longer return. Not only the appearance of the sword Maiden, but even the appearance of the sword itself had completely changed. But this was also good. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about someone guessing that the fishbowl sword was actually in Guhan's hands based on Ji Yun's appearance. The disappearance of the fishbowl sword would also become an unsolved mystery. Until Guhan could control his own fate, perhaps the truth could be announced. In a sense, the fishbowl sword was no longer the fishbowl sword. It might be more suitable to call it the Ji Yun sword. Of course, Guhan would never call a sword by his own sister's name. Guhan had to give the sword Maiden that Ji Yun had turned into a new name to avoid trouble in the future. Guhan thought for a long time and felt that he should still keep the word fish in the fishbowl sword to represent respect for the former fishbowl sword. After all, the fishbowl sword had made great contributions to humanity. Completely erasing its former name was also an extremely heartless thing to do. Then, Guhan asked Ji Yun what word she liked. After all, Ji Yun was the one who came up with the name, so she needed to consider her own opinion. After thinking for a long time, The word battle jumped out of Ji Yun's mouth. Guhan didn't ask her why she chose such a name. He nimbly placed the word battle in front of the fishbowl sword. From now on, the world would have one less fishbowl sword and one more Duyu sword. Guhan and Ji Yun discussed it. Ji Yun wanted to appear in this world in human form as much as possible. Unless it was absolutely necessary, she definitely couldn't reveal the fact that she was also a sword maiden in front of others. This was because if Ji Yun revealed the fact that she was a sword maiden, then there would be too many things that Guhan wouldn't be able to explain. The first thing he would do was to explain how Guhan could have 3 sword maidens at the treasure sword level. After deciding on these matters, Guhan began to cultivate the yin-yang sword art. Apart from natural sword maidens of the same level, there was actually another requirement to cultivate the yin-yang sword art, and that was that the 2 sword maidens had to have the same level of depth. This was easy to deal with. There were quite a lot of sword mark dust and fragments left in Guhan's hands. Guhan first deepened the Duyu sword and the heavenly sword to the 8th grade. This way, the 2 sword maidens would have the same level of depth. After that, he needed to go through a series of extremely complicated cultivation procedures. There was no need to explain them one by one. In any case, there was no point in explaining them one by one. This was the final step of practicing the yin-yang sword formula, and that was to connect the sword marks on Yuchang and Heavenly Reliance sword to the main meridians of the sword wielder's body. Then, they would have to complete a great chi cycle. This was an extremely long process. Controlling the meridians of the entire body was a slow and steady process. Just completing it once would take Guhan an entire 10 days. What was even more frightening was that this process couldn't be interrupted. Once it was interrupted, there would be the danger of chi deviation. As a result, Ji Yuhan did not eat or drink during these 10 days. He focused all his attention on maintaining the circulation of the entire great circulatory cycle. The heavens took pity on him. There were no more unforeseen events during this period, and he successfully completed this process. This was also the reason why Guhan was delayed in his room for 10 days. He only returned to the finishing point on the 12th day. Of course, this also seemed to explain why Guhan ate so much like a reincarnated hungry ghost. After all, he had been starving for 10 days. Chapter 419. The memories ended, and time returned to the time when Guhan was facing off against Isis. Although the fishbowl sword had become the Duyu sword, and its appearance had changed greatly, the Duyu sword skills hadn't changed at all. At least, her basic skill, Pursuing Shadow, hadn't changed at all. Basic skill, Pursuing Shadow, continuously consumes sword essence to enter the state of Pursuing Shadow, allowing the sword maiden's attack speed and movement speed to change according to the enemy's movements. The amount of sword essence required for pursuing the shadow was inversely proportional to the sword maiden's own swordsmanship level and body speed. The higher the level of the sword maiden's swordsmanship and physical fitness, the less sword essence she consumes. The skill can only capture the speed of Yuan Ku, who is 1 realm higher than the sword wielder. Simply put, Pursuit was a skill that allowed 2 opponents with a huge difference in strength to pull their speed to the same level. This was also the reason why Guhan was able to keep up with Isai's attack speed the second time he faced her. It was because of this skill that increased Guhan's speed to the same level as Isai's. Based on this alone, it could be seen just how powerful yin-yang sword technique was. Guhan was originally just a treasured sword, but once he mastered yin-yang sword technique, he had the physical attributes of Heavenly Sword and Duyu Sword, which were the strongest and second strongest sword ladies in the treasured sword realm. When they worked together, his physical attributes would not be any lower than the bonus a sword lady could provide to a sword wielder. Therefore, Guhan's current strength could already be considered at the level of a famed sword. That was the only way the Duyu sword's Pursuing Shadow could catch up to Isai's speed. This was because Isai's was a meteor-level Yuanshan, which was 1 major realm and 2 minor realms higher than a famed sword-level swordmistress. Duyu sword could only capture the speed of a Yuanshan that was 1 major realm higher than Ji Yuhan. This meant that even though Ji Yuhan was only a treasured sword-level swordmistress in name, her strength had already reached the level of a famed sword level. Isis has the fishbowl sword. Oh, I should call her the Duyu sword now. Guhan held two swords in his hands and looked at Isis, the female bear, proudly. With my Duyu sword, you can't win against me. The fishbowl sword can only increase your speed, but your attack and defense are still at the level of a treasured sword. How could I, Isis, be afraid of you? You just have to take a hit from my claw, and it'll be time to send you back. Isis said angrily. That's right, I can't take your full attack. Although Guhan said so, the expression on his face was very disdainful. But the premise is that you can attack me. It's not that I look down on you, Isis, but with your appearance, you will never be able to hit me in your lifetime. You. Isis was about to explode. What's wrong? Are you angry? Guhan continued to mock him. Am I wrong? Don't tell me you don't look like a bear. Ji-Yuhan was right, Isis did look like a bear. I'm going to kill you. Isis finally couldn't take it anymore from Guhan and used another flash. This time, Isis didn't plan to hold back. She wanted to kill Guhan. As for how she would be punished by sky covering Jendi after killing Guhan, Isis couldn't care less. I said you can't attack me. Facing Isis' flash attack, Guhan naturally flashed behind Isis. The heavenly sword and the Duyu sword smashed into Isis' back at the same time, leaving a bloody mark on her body. And so, one man and one bear started flashing around the room. Isis' strategy was very simple. First of all, she was a meteor stage Yuan Ku, and her defense and HP were much higher than Guhan's. A mere bloody mark couldn't even deal 1/10,000th of Isis' HP, so she wasn't afraid of Guhan's exhaustion at all. On the contrary, Isis wanted to exhaust Guhan by relentlessly chasing after Guhan to exhaust Guhan. She wasn't exhausting Guhan's HP. After all, she couldn't hit Guhan. What she wanted to exhaust was Guhan's stamina. Guhan borrowed the Duyu sword skill and used the body of a famed sword to display the speed of a meteor stage. Even if Guhan was a genius, his stamina and sword essence weren't enough for him to fight for a long time. Once Guhan's stamina ran out or his sword essence was exhausted, what awaited Guhan would be death. If Guhan lost his speed, Isis could easily crush him to death. Of course, Guhan knew this. Guhan was very clear about his own body's condition. He couldn't start a long battle with Isis. After synchronizing the Duyu sword, Guhan's sword essence had exceeded 4,000 quarks, which was a third more than before. But compared to a meteor stage, which was equivalent to hundreds of thousands of elements, it was nothing. It was impossible for Guhan to exhaust Isis. Therefore, if Guhan wanted to defeat Isis, he had to use some tricks, and this trick was to anger Isis from the beginning, so that she would attack him crazily without caring about anything else. Originally, Guhan was worried that Isis, who had lived for thousands of years, had a good temper. What if he couldn't anger her? But now, it seemed that Isis was too easy to anger. Just one sentence was enough to make Isis lose her calm. This was too calm, too unscientific. Later, when Guhan recalled this experience, he felt that external factors must have affected Isis' emotions. Perhaps it was the thing that made Isis suddenly go crazy, and even made Isis lose control of her emotions. When Isis continued to attack crazily, all of Guhan's attention was not focused on dealing with Isis' attacks. On the contrary, most of Guhan's spirit was nailed to Isis' face, and only some of his remaining energy was used to deal with Isis' attacks. In any case, Isis' attack was too clumsy. Not only could it not compare to Ji-Yuhan, it could not even compare to the majority of the swordbearers outside. If those swordbearers had the same speed as Isis, each of them would be able to beat Isis in close combat. So the question was, why was Guhan staring at Isis' face? Was Isis' face as beautiful as a fairy's? Of course not. Isis had a bear's face. Even if she was a beautiful female bear that was rarely seen in 4,000 years, it made no difference to Ji-Yuhan. What Guhan really cared about was Isis' nose. For a bear, its nose was its biggest weakness. A bear's nose was very sensitive. It could smell things more than 10 kilometers away. This was why bears could eat honey. They could always smell the sweetness of a beehive from a few kilometers away. The reason for this was that a bear's nose was a collection of a large number of bear's nerve tissue. This nose not only gave the bear an unparalleled sense of smell, but also a fatal weakness. There was once a story about a drunkard from a fighting race who encountered a bear while walking. This drunkard was not afraid when he saw the bear. Instead, without saying anything, he directly threw a punch at the bear's face. Then, something unbelievable happened. This drunkard actually knocked out the bear with a single punch. Of course, the drunkard was not possessed by Saitama and became a one-punch drunkard. He was just an ordinary person. His punch did not even have the power to shake the huge bear, let alone knock it out. The reason for this was that his punch landed squarely on the bear's nose. As mentioned before, a bear's nose was full of nerve tissue. It was super sensitive. In other words, sensitive was sensitive. When the drunkard's fist landed on the bear's nose, it was the equivalent of breaking through the protection of the human's skull and landing a punch directly on the human's brain. It would be strange if the bear did not faint after receiving a fatal blow in such a place. By the way, here's a small suggestion for everyone. If you want to experience the feeling of a bear's nose being smashed, but you don't want to punch your own head, I suggest that you prepare a bottle of essential balm and apply it on your fingers. Then gently rub it on your little head. If there are female readers, you can also rub it on your little bean. This way, you can experience the feeling of a bear's nose being smashed. Bears were very clear about this weakness. So wild bears would try their best to protect their nose and not give the enemy a chance to attack their nose. It was the same for Ice Eyes. In the beginning, even when she was attacking, Ice Eyes would deliberately protect her nose so that Guhan could not attack her weakness. However, when Ice Eyes fell into a frenzy and began to attack crazily, this weakness was inevitably exposed. In order to pursue more attacks, Ice Eyes naturally ignored the protection of her nose. That was an opportunity for Guhan. I see it. Guhan's eyes lit up. In an instant, Guhan noticed that Ice Eye's hand had completely left her nose. Her attention was completely focused on Guhan and she had completely forgotten about her nose. How could Guhan give up this rare opportunity? Yin-yang fusion. At that moment, Guhan suddenly merged the heavenly sword and the Duyu sword in his hands. When the two swords came into contact, they mixed together like water, forming a strange blue and red sword. This sword was the new sword mistress born from the fusion of the heavenly sword and the Duyu sword through the yin-yang sword secret art. The power of this brand new sword mistress was undeniable. Ice Eyes felt something like a beam of light flashing in front of her. Then, all the pain that could not be described by words exploded in her brain. In less than a second, Ice Eyes passed out. Her nose was still a bloody mess, and her original appearance could not be seen clearly. Chapter 420. It was almost impossible to defeat Ice Eyes completely because Ice Eyes was too tanky. Even if Guhan used up all his sword elements, he wouldn't be able to cause any serious damage to Ice Eyes. Knocking Ice Eyes unconscious was the best option. The final gate guarded by Ice Eyes was now open. Guhan only needed to walk in gently to see the last thing Zhijendi left behind. I bet 50 cents that this person will go back in less than 10 seconds. Reinhard said angrily as he watched Guhan go in. He was frightened by Guhan's counterattack just now. He finally regained his senses and said fiercely, "Maybe he can last more than 20 seconds. Liuyan Ling sheathed the Yixian sword and said coldly, "Impossible, he's not a Yi descendant. How can he last more than 20 seconds? This is impossible." Reinhard said confidently, "Look down on him. Do you dare to bet with me? I think this person can last more than 20 seconds. Liuyan Ling said proudly, "Let's bet. Let's make this clear. I won't do it if the stakes are too low. If you want to bet, let's bet." Before Reinhard could finish his sentence, he heard a crisp bell-like laughter. "Reinhard, why are you still betting? 20 seconds have passed while you were talking." This was Ladia's voice from Berlin City. Although Ladia's intention was to mock Reinhard, she accidentally saved Reinhard's life. Reinhard swallowed the stakes that he had already said. Liuyan Ling glared at Ladia angrily. Ladia finally reacted and immediately looked at Liuyan Ling with a pitiful and apologetic expression. Speaking of which, 20 seconds should be the longest battle time other than the descendant of Zhejiandi. Messi, one of the twin stars of Buenos Aires, said. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to talk to someone. Most of the time, he was either passively answering some questions or flirting with his sister, Melanie, intimately with each other. My dear good brother, you're wrong. It's already 30 seconds. My Lan teased. Oh, I'm wrong. My dear good sister is still smarter. No, actually, my dear good brother is smarter. Well, the two of them were caught up in the endless display of affection between brother and sister. However, what they said was the truth. Guhan had already lasted 30 seconds, but there was still no notification of failure. Didn't this mean that Guhan was still fighting inside? Everyone began to panic. They strained their ears to listen to the notification of failure that could come at any time. At the same time, a small sapling began to sprout in their hearts. They could not help but ask themselves, does the swordsman from Yuzhang City have the slightest chance of succeeding? As time ticked by, the 30 seconds became 1 minute, then 5 minutes, and finally 20 minutes. The notification of failure still did not appear, but the sapling in their hearts had already grown into a towering tree. Many of the swordsmen already believed that the swordsman from Yuzhang City had a chance of defeating Yuan Ku, who had tortured them all. Hey, little fellow from the Zhetian family, come here. Let me ask you, is the person who just entered your family? Reinhard walked up to Yi Wenjun with a menacing look on his face. He was just short of grabbing Yi Wenjun and asking him a question. No, the Lionian family only has one descendant. I'm the only one in this generation. I don't have any other siblings. Yi Wenjun immediately replied. F***ck, does that guy really have the ability to defeat that troublesome she-bear? Reinhard slammed his sword on the ground and asked Yi Wenjun, then let me ask you again. What's the name of the person who just entered? Which family is he from? Since it was possible for Lionheart to defeat the Guardian Yuanshan and obtain the reward from the endpoint, Lionheart had to pay more attention to Lionheart. He could not let his guard down and had to grasp all the information about Lionheart. It would be of great use later. No matter how stupid Yi Wenjun was, he could tell that Reinhard was up to no good. He was indebted to Ji Yuhan, so he couldn't just give away the information about Ji Yuhan. Thus, Yi Wenjun clenched his teeth and shook his head. I can't tell you. I can't tell you. Reinhard did not expect a weak-looking guy like Yi Wenjun to dare to defy him. He was furious and decided to teach the kid a lesson. However, before he could do anything, Lionian Ling stood in front of him. Enough, Reinhard. You're getting more and more useless. Do you still want to attack our comrade? I still haven't charged you with the crime of suddenly attacking Ji Yuhan. Don't you want to spend a few years in our Yangjing City's discipline committee? No, Miss Lionian Ling must be joking. How would I dare to touch the descendant of Zhetian Jiendi? I just want to know the name of that handsome guy. I want to be friends with him. Is it wrong to be friends with him? Reinhard said plausibly. Reinhard, you don't have to interrogate this little guy. I know about that person. Let me tell you. Suddenly, Ashma, who had been silent, said in a loud voice that everyone could hear, that guy's name is Guhan. He was born as a commoner in Yuzhang City. However, his master is Cloudy Sword Immortal Liu Lei. His sword is the Heavenly Sword. He's also a sword master with outstanding swordsmanship. You will never be able to defeat him. Ashma's words caused waves in the crowd. Everyone was shocked by the news that Ashma had just said. Commoner. A Sword Immortal's disciple. The Heavenly Sword Immortal's sword master. And a sword master whose swordsmanship was even better than Reinhard's. When these conditions were put together, most of the sword bearers present began to feel ashamed of their inferiority. Disregarding everything else, just the heavenly sword in the other person's hand was the object of everyone's envy and jealousy. It must be known that everyone present was a sword bearer of the treasure sword level. The heavenly sword was publicly recognized as the #1 sword master in the treasure sword level. The sword master that hadn't appeared in the world for 350 years had actually appeared again. Didn't that mean that the other person was the number one sword bearer in the treasure sword level? Was he the most powerful person present? Ashma, how reliable is your information? How do you know all this? Reinhard asked in a deep voice. If what Ashma said was true, then Guhan was definitely a powerful opponent. There would be many variables in the operation later. Reinhard had to find out whether what Ashma said was true or not. Of course it's true. It was Miss Lionian Ling who told me about Guhan's name and master. As for the heavenly sword in his hand, I personally experienced it. She really is a powerful sword master. In that narrow road battle, my future sword was completely defeated by Lady Heavenly Sword. As for his swordsmanship, Reinhard, don't tell me you've forgotten the strike he used before he left. Ashma's words were reasonable and convincing. At the very least, Reinhard was rendered speechless by Ashma's last sentence. That sword strike was probably something that Reinhard would never forget for the rest of his life. Just as everyone was discussing Guhan, the male version of Gendi's voice that they had been waiting for finally rang out. Some trial takers have reached the final finish line. The final finish line will be opened in an hour. Everyone can enter and take a look. There was a long period of silence. No one could believe that someone had actually defeated the terrifying Yuan Ku. F***CK. Suddenly, Reinhard slapped his thigh. In an hour, all the good stuff has been taken away by that person. Where the heart is. After Guhan entered the final finish line, he found that there were two identical doors in front of him. The words "where the heart is" were written in the middle of the two doors. What does this mean? Are you asking my heart to make a choice? Guhan pursed his lips and chose the door on the left without hesitation. The reason was simple. The door on the left was carved with a bunch of strange words from an unknown civilization. Other people would not be able to understand these words, but Guhan could recognize them at a glance. Weren't these the same words he had carved on the back of the statues of the three Egyptian gods to fool Bastet? Gendi had written these words in front of the door. It was obvious that he was inviting Guhan to walk through this door. Guhan took a step forward and pushed the door open. Suddenly, an extremely strong suction force erupted from the gate. Ji Han did not resist at all and was sucked in by this suction force. When he woke up again, he was already in a fairy-tale-like world with lush green grass stretching into the sky. Ji Han's location was a clean, dark green grassland. In the distance, there was a lush forest. Beside the forest, there was a shallow stream. The sky was decorated with twinkling lights, like stars in the night. Countless cute little animals lived in this world. In just a glance, Guhan saw no less than 20 pure white rabbits, pheasants flying everywhere, brownish-red foxes hiding in the bushes to peep at Guhan, and birds constantly singing in the trees. This was simply a fairy-tale-like world, especially when Guhan saw a candy house in the middle of the grassland. Guhan had once read such a fairy tale passed down from before the apocalypse. It was said that a kind witch built a beautiful candy house, and then invited all the cute children to play in the candy house. Once upon a time, Guhan would accompany this fairy tale to sleep. Guhan's wish for a year or two was to be able to see such a candy house with his own eyes, and then enjoy delicious candy in the candy house forever. Unfortunately, this wish of his had been buried in the abyss by Ji Han when his parents had died. Who would have thought that on this day, the scene in front of him would evoke his memories again? Chapter 421. Guhan woke up from his memories. Although he did not know why the final destination was such a fairytale-like place, there was no doubt that this was a place that made Guhan feel relaxed from the bottom of his heart. The air here was filled with a sweet fragrance that seeped into one's heart. It made Guhan feel an inexplicable desire to spend the rest of his life here, ignoring all kinds of hatred and battles in the outside world. However, this thought did not exist for long before it was completely eliminated by Guhan. If he succeeded in the future and the world was at peace, perhaps Guhan would be willing to come here and live in seclusion. But now, Guhan still needed to fight for humanity, not be a coward here. After a closer look, Guhan found that the entire fairytale-like world was built in a large cave. Although there was a sun in the sky, It was actually a super fluorescent lamp that would not go out for a long time, the kind that had a power of hundreds of thousands of watts. The stars in the sky should also be something similar to the LED flash of a mobile phone. The surrounding walls were all painted with murals of the sky. It seemed to be an endless space, but in fact, it was only a small space of less than 10 acres. For example, this was like a crystal world that was decorated in a home. A glass ball the size of a volleyball had a small world inside. There was water, houses, trees, people, and even snow in that world. But at the end of the day, it was just a toy. I wonder how Zhe Tianzhendi managed to keep this world intact for more than 700 years. Ji Yuhan silently pondered. To isolate such a closed world from the Earth's own ecosystem, it would require a lot of black technology to complete. For example, the things that these trees needed for photosynthesis, the nutrients that the trees needed to grow, the balance of the ecosystem, and so on were super complicated problems. In Zhe Tianzhendi's era, technology had not fully recovered to the era before the Great Destruction. How did these things be built? Well, this trial formation itself is a miracle. Compared to the trial formation, this small fairy-tale-like world is not a difficult thing. Guhan shook his head, then released all the sword maidens from his scabbard. Where is this? It's so beautiful. The first one to jump out was the cute Qingpin. She was still wearing her favorite crocodile costume today. Her little head was in the crocodile's mouth, looking very cute. Ji Yun, on the other hand, was wearing Qingpin's sister suit, a shark suit. Her head was also inside a shark's mouth. This set of clothes was given to Ji Yun as a gift by Qingpin after Ji Yun was reborn. He said that the two of them would be good sisters from now on. They would enjoy happiness together, eat meat together, and lie in Guhan's embrace together. He also chased away the other women who coveted Guhan's embrace. In short, the two sword maidens instantly became a pair of good friends and sisters. Needless to say, when Ji Yun and Qingpin were wearing crocodile and shark costumes and holding hands, exploring this novel fairytale world, Guhan suddenly felt that they were really a pair of twin sisters. Guhan, let me ask you, where is this place? Why is it so beautiful? Although she was wearing a meaty crocodile costume, Qingpin still skillfully climbed onto Guhan's neck, grabbed Guhan's ear, and asked Guhan. I also don't know where this place is, but it should be an interesting place. Guhan pulled Qingpin down from his body. You two have fun here for a while. You've been fighting and cultivating for the past few days. It's really been hard on you too. Take this opportunity to have a good rest. Whether we can encounter such a beautiful place in the future is still a huge question mark. Alright, let's go play. Qingpin grabbed Guhan's hand. The two cute little things wagged their tails and ran into the depths of the forest. Guhan turned his head to look at Yi, who was beside him. You're not going to play? Nope. Yi waved his hand lazily. These past few days, I've been tortured by you and fish guts to the point that my bones are about to break. As for my sword mark, even though it's slightly better than before, I still can't completely control it. I just want to fight to the death with the Duyu sword behind me. I'm so annoyed by it that I'm about to die. Then let me ask you, how did it feel when you fused with the Duyu sword for the first time? Guhan asked after some thought. The fusion that Guhan was talking about was the fusion of the Duyu sword and the heavenly sword when he dealt with Isai's last attack. Guhan didn't know how many attacks he had to hit Isai's nose to make her faint. Guhan only had one chance to kill her. If he failed that time, Isai's would definitely not expose her nose to Guhan again. That was why Guhan had to use his strongest attack. And the strongest attack in the yin-yang sword art was undoubtedly the attack that the two sword ladies combined into one to form a new sword lady. The yin-yang sword secret art had 5 realms. Due to the lack of time and his lack of strength, Guhan had only mastered the first 2 realms. The first realm was called yin-yang intersection. It allowed the sword wielder to hold 2 sword ladies at the same time. At the same time, the physical attributes of the 2 sword ladies would be added to the sword wielder's body. It was worth noting that this yin-yang intersecting buff could only be activated when the wielder held both swords at the same time. When 2 sword maidens fought alone, they would not be able to activate the buff of their physical attributes. In other words, in order to use the yin-yang intersection buff, Guhan had to fight in his sword master form. The second realm of the yin-yang sword secret art was called yin-yang combination. It allowed the two sword ladies to fuse into one and form a new sword master. This way, when the sword master came out to fight, the attributes of the two sword ladies would be added together. There was no need for the sword wielder to fight personally. If the sword wielder fought personally, their strength would increase by another level. Controlling a sword master with twice the physical attributes of a sword master with twice the physical attributes of a sword master with twice the physical attributes of a sword master with twice the physical attributes of a sword master was amazing. This was the strongest attack that Guhan could use. From the results, it could be seen that the effect of this attack was very obvious. Although a bear's nose was the weakest part of a bear's body, no matter how weak its defense was, with the Isis Meteor level Yuan Ku as a foundation, its defense wouldn't be too bad. At the very least, it would have the defense of an ordinary nether level Yuan Ku. Guhan's strongest attack was able to pierce through the nether level Yuan Ku's defense. This proved that Guhan already had the ability to fight against a nether level Yuan Ku. It wasn't like when he defeated Isis by attacking the opponent's weakness and knocking him unconscious. Instead, it was a true victory by completely destroying the opponent's body. It's not that great. It feels like a child was stuffed under my body, and this child isn't even my own, and it's stuffed back into my body when it's 5 or 6 years old. Yi Tian's criticism was very sharp, allowing Guhan to understand Yi Tian's feelings just by listening. But it's not without benefits. At least I experienced a feeling that I've never experienced before, a feeling of power that I've never felt before. Yi Tian stretched, just because of this feeling. When we have to fuse in the future, let me fuse as much as you want. I'll help you defeat all your enemies. After saying this, Yi Tian disappeared. Guhan revealed a smile, got up from the ground, and began to slowly walk towards the candy house. Guhan knew that if Zhe Tianjendi left something for him, it would definitely be in the candy house. After walking to the front of the candy house, Guhan discovered that it was actually a real candy house. The walls of the candy house were made of dark chocolate, and the decorations on it were inlaid with hard fruit candy of various colors. The white windows looked like they were made of white chocolate, and the steps leading upstairs were filled with golden syrup. The chimney of the house was made of large pieces of ginger candy, and the smoke coming out of it looked like cotton candy. Seeing such a beautiful house, smelling such a sweet smell that was like a childhood dream, Guhan was a little afraid to touch the house, deeply afraid that if he used too much force, he would push this perfect house down. In fact, Guhan was even more afraid that his dirty body would pollute this pure candy house. Guhan never thought that he would be so conflicted. Just 10 seconds ago, Guhan planned to break the door without any hesitation. It was just candy. If he lost his life, why would he care about candy? However, when he really stood in front of this fairytale building, Guhan began to struggle. He instinctively resisted, unwilling to destroy the beauty of this candy house, unwilling to pollute the purity of the entire candy house. Just as Jiyu Han was in a dilemma, the door to the candy house suddenly opened, and a person walked out. She was holding a tray in her hand, and on it was a golden cicada robe and a pair of snow-white cloth shoes. "Husband, you're already at your own door, why are you still hesitating? Quickly change into these clothes and go home," a voice that had been repeatedly echoing in Guhan's mind recently said. This voice caused Jiyu Han to shiver from head to toe. He raised his head and saw Yi Qing's gentle face looking at him affectionately. The corners of her mouth were brimming with a smile of reunion after a long time. "Well, I'm back." Not knowing why, Guhan's heart came up with such a sentence, and then so naturally answered. Chapter 422. Welcome home, my husband. Yi Qing, who was waiting at the door, had a smile like a flower bud on her face, which made Jiyu Han's heart warm. Jiyu Han even thought that Yi Qing had been waiting for his return for a few milliseconds. However, Guhan quickly realized that Yi Qing had already left this world. The Yi Qing in front of him was definitely not the real Yi Qing. Guhan carefully observed this Yi Qing's face and found that compared to the young Yi Qing in the dungeon, this Yi Qing looked much more mature. There was a feminine charm and gentleness between her eyebrows. In terms of figure, this Yi Qing was obviously much taller than the young Yi Qing. Her body was not like the shriveled little girl he first saw. Every part of her body had become plump. In terms of appearance, this Yi Qing should be in her 30s. Gu Han silently made such a judgment in his heart. However, what made Gu Han feel strange was that Yi Qing's figure was still the same as when she was a young girl, although she was already in her 30s. She was somewhat shriveled, thin, and her buttocks and chest did not rise or fall. She still looked like a tomboy. She did not look like a mature woman in her 30s at all. However, when Gu Han thought about it, this should be the most normal appearance. In history, the heaven-covering Jendi had deceived everyone with his identity as a man. If he became as plump as a girl in his 30s, how could he hide it from the eyes of the world? Only by thinking of his current appearance could people not see him as a young man. "Husband, why are you standing at the door? Hurry up and change." Yi Qing saw that Gu Han had been standing at the door and looking at her. She blushed and squatted down. She held Gu Han's feet and prepared to help Gu Han take off his shoes. "No need, I'll do it myself." Ji Han shuddered and immediately tried to pull his leg out from Yi Qing's grasp, but he didn't expect Yi Qing's grip to be so strong, and Ji Han had to use some strength to jump back. He only heard the sound of a lump, and Ji Han's leg was a distance away from Yi Qing, but Yi Qing's hand was still holding onto Ji Han's ankle. What was going on? Yi Qing's hands were like rubber as Gu Han stretched them 3 to 4 meters away. This truly gave Ji Han a fright. "I'm sorry, Qing, scared husband." Seeing Gu Han's surprised expression, Yi Qing took a step back like a frightened rabbit. Then, her hand left Gu Han's ankle and retracted like a rubber band, becoming a normal arm. "Give me the clothes, I'll wear them myself." Gu Han quickly recovered from the shock and said to Yi Qing. So, Yi Qing handed the clean clothes and shoes to Gu Han. After Gu Han changed into them, he stepped into the candy house that originally only existed in fairy tales. "Husband, please." Yi Qing gently pushed open the door of the candy house. Only then did Gu Han see the decorations inside. There was a living room decorated with various bright colors. Inside the living room, there were 2 rooms with their doors closed. There were all kinds of lovely and artistic decorations in the living room. There were some animal head specimens on the wall and many group photos. What surprised Gu Han was that although these group photos were group photos, only Yi Qing's face was in them. The person standing next to Yi Qing and taking a group photo with her was forcibly cut out of the photo. Who was the person who was cut out? Could it be me? Gu Han thought silently. "Husband, take a rest here. Qing will make tea for you." After Yi Qing led Gu Han into the living room, she pointed to a sofa and asked Gu Han to sit down and rest. Then, she walked into a room that seemed to be the kitchen and began to prepare tea for Gu Han. Gu Han looked at the sofa. It was actually made of sticky candy. The surface was densely covered with a layer of black sesame seeds, forming the skin of the sofa. Not to mention other things, sitting on it felt more comfortable than sitting on a real sofa. There was also a fragrance of peanuts around Gu Han. "Husband, please have some tea." Yi Qing carried a tea set to the tea table in front of Gu Han. Then, she carefully placed the teacups and poured a cup of tea for Gu Han. Gu Han picked up the teacup. This teacup was actually made of peanut candy. When he tasted the tea inside, it tasted like barley tea. Although barley tea could also be categorized as maltose, it was the closest thing Ji Han had seen in this room to its original form. Barley tea was indeed tea. While Gu Han was drinking tea, Yi Qing silently sat beside Gu Han. She leaned on Gu Han's shoulder and muttered the word husband in a daze. Although Gu Han's stomach was full of questions, Gu Han didn't say anything. He just kept drinking the bitter barley tea. It was clearly a sugar, but it had a bitter taste. This barley tea was really a magical thing. "Husband, don't you want to ask Qing any questions?" After waiting for a long time, Gu Han didn't ask any questions. Instead, Yi Qing took the initiative to ask. "Yes." Gu Han nodded. "But we still have a lot of time. You don't have to be impatient. You can still lean on my shoulder for a while. Husband, you're still so good." Ching-er has no regrets following husband. Yi Ching hugged Guhan's waist and said in a daze. However, after a while, Yi Ching helplessly straightened her body. Although Ching-er also wants to stay with husband for a long time, husband can only stay here for an hour. After an hour, husband has to leave this place, so Ching-er still has some things to tell husband. An hour. When Guhan heard that there was a time limit, he frowned. Why is there a time limit? Husband, how long do you think this place can exist? Yi Ching smiled bitterly. In order to preserve this place, Ching-er extracted all the bacteria and oxygen in it. Then, she used the life confinement array to preserve this place for 700 years. Now that you've entered, the oxygen and bacteria will return to this place, and the shackles on life will be lifted. After all, this is something that goes against the heavens. A life that has been sealed for 700 years will turn into a pile of bones in an hour, and these candies that have been sealed for 700 years will turn into a puddle of stinky water. Therefore, you can only stay here for an hour, husband. So that was why. Guhan believed Yi Ching's explanation. No wonder this strange place could maintain its beauty for 700 years. No wonder the animals, plants, birds, beasts, insects, and fish were still so lively. It turned out that their lives were all poor people who had been imprisoned. Although this allowed them to defy the laws of nature and live for more than 700 years, the price was that they could only live for about an hour after their resurrection. Even this candy house would probably rot into a pool of black water in a short time due to the corrosion of bacteria and oxygen. You shouldn't have told me this. I don't want to imagine this place being destroyed. Guhan pondered for a while and finally said this. These were Guhan's heartfelt words. He really didn't want to see this place destroyed. He really liked this dreamy fairytale zone. No matter how beautiful it is, it has to be destroyed. Even Ching-er will turn into a pool of disgusting water after an hour. So, Ching-er hopes that husband can leave this place as soon as possible. The sooner, the better. Then, Ching-er will be satisfied. Yi Ching said sadly. Yi Ching, you're also a candy maker, right? Seeing Yi Ching's expression, Guhan recalled Yi Ching's arm that could stretch to a few meters long. He naturally had some guesses about Yi Ching. Yi Ching was the same as this candy house. They were both made of candy. Husband's wisdom is still so amazing. Even though Ching-er's body has been made flawlessly, husband still saw through it. When Yi Ching said this, his expression seemed a little depressed and a little excited. A candy man could make these subtle expressions so perfectly. Just as Yi Ching said, it had reached the point of flawlessness. Even a flawless appearance can't hide the sweet smell on your body. Plus your hand just now. Your hand should be made of gummy candy, right? Guhan said leisurely. No, it's not gummy candy. Yi Ching stretched out his finger. This is called QQ candy. The scientific name is Wang Zai QQ candy. Wang Zai QQ candy? Why did you give it such a strange name? Guhan asked. This name was too stupid. How could there be such a stupid name in this world? You have to ask yourself this question. This name was given by husband. Yi Ching's answer made Guhan feel a little ashamed. It turned out that such a stupid name was given by himself. Yi Ching, can you tell me what's going on with you now? Guhan thought for a while and asked this question. Ching-er is probably a puppet now. Yi Ching's face was full of smiles. But the real Yi Ching left a lot of memories for Ching-er before he left. Ching-er feels that Ching-er is the real Ching-er and is husband's wife. Is that so? Guhan's heart was full of emotions. What kind of entanglement did this heaven-covering Jendi have with him? He could feel these feelings from her all the time that even he didn't know what to do. Well, husband, let's not talk about these meaningless things. We should get down to business. Yi Ching clapped his hands and a closed door was opened. There was a sound of an electric motor running inside and a toy truck drove out of the room. There seemed to be something in the back of the truck. Guhan looked at it and saw that there was nothing else in the back of the truck. It was a long sword that was completely black. Could this be the sword lady that Hao Tianjendi said was about to awaken an emperor sword? Seeing this sword, Guhan's hair stood on end. Chapter 423. What Emperor Sword? Yi Qing had a cute, clueless expression on her face. It's just a famed sword maiden, that's all. This is a famed sword maiden. Guhan extended his hand and held the famed sword maiden in his hand. Because Guhan only had 4,000 points of sword essence, he did not have to worry about synchronizing with the sword maiden while holding it. This was a sword maiden that was completely black from head to toe. To use an analogy, Guhan felt that it was more like a sword maiden carved out of a large piece of graphite. Don't you know what graphite is? Don't worry, go get a pencil and pull out the pencil lead, then you'll see the graphite. Of course, if you get blackened because you pulled out the graphite, then it would have nothing to do with the author. However, although this sword was as black as graphite, it did not leave a mark on Guhan's hand. The shape of this sword was quite simple. It was a rectangular sword hilt with an ordinary blade sticking out of it. If there was anything special about it, it would be that this sword's blade was very long. It was estimated to be about 1.2 meters long, which was about the same height as a poor person. It would probably be quite awkward to use it, and it would require a special sword technique to complement it. Guhan's fingers touched the blade of the sword bit by bit, using his skin to feel the aura of this sword. Yes, using his skin to feel the aura of this sword. If Ji Han did not remember all the sword ladies of the ancient and treasure sword grades, then Ji Han definitely remembered and understood all the sword ladies of the famed sword grades. There were 403 famed sword maidens in total, and Guhan had memorized all of them in a week. However, in Guhan's memory, this completely black sword had never appeared before. In other words, this was a new famed sword maiden that had not been recorded by humans. This was a huge discovery that could be called big news. It was not like the first few hundred years after the apocalypse. At that time, new sword maidens would be discovered every year. However, now that it had been more than 1,000 years, even the ancient sword maidens, which had the most numbers, rarely had new members. Generally speaking, it was possible to find a brand new sword maiden every few years for ancient sword maidens, and it was possible to find new sword maidens every few decades for treasured swords. However, for famed swords, the last famed sword maiden had been around 50 years ago. Unfortunately, if this was the only famed sword maiden that had been found, it would be normal for the 8 bases to broadcast the news for 3 days and 3 nights. However, this time, there was a brand new Emperor Sword Level Sword Lady that had been discovered. This famous Sword Level Sword Lady had become a bonus, an appetizer. Because this was a newly discovered sword lady, there was naturally no information about her in the human database. Ji Han had no way of knowing how strong this sword lady was, so he could only use his skin to sense it. This was similar to a human's sixth sense. There was nothing scientific about it, but there were always miraculous stories about it. This is indeed a famed sword maiden, and I can feel the great power contained within it. Moreover, the material used is very special. It seems to be a wooden sword made from a type of wood. Guhan put down the famed sword maiden in his hand and made this judgment. Wooden swords were a very special existence among sword maidens. Among all sword maidens, about 1/30 of them were wooden swords. After all, there were many famous wooden swords in the history of the world. Moreover, most people would use wooden swords when they first started swordsmanship. However, because of the material used to make wooden swords, they were not very powerful after they became sword maidens. They were considered to be at the bottom of the list. Among the ancient sword maidens and treasure sword maidens, 3 out of 10 were wooden swords. Therefore, Guhan was very surprised. The famed sword maiden in his hand had a power that even the Yu King Gojian sword could not compare to. This was a power that could be ranked in the top 10 of the famed sword maidens. This kind of power actually came from a wooden sword. It was too miraculous. My husband's eyes are as bright as a torch. If Qing'er remembers correctly, this sword will fight with the 3-foot goddess for the #1 spot in the famed sword tier in the future. Yi Qing chuckled. This sword can actually fight with the 3-foot sword for the #1 spot. Guhan once again sized up the sword maiden in his hand in disbelief. Although Guhan had already guessed that this sword could fight for a spot in the top 10 of the famed sword tier, He never imagined that it could actually fight with the 3-foot sword for the number 1 spot. If the first and second place in the treasure sword tier, the heavenly sword and the fish intestine, were separated by less than 5%, then the first and second place in the famed sword tier were separated by 100%. That's right, the difference in strength between the first and second place in the famed sword tier was just that terrifying. The first place sword maiden was able to crush the second place by a whole fold. That's right. Yi Qing blinked. My husband will know the specifics in the future. Qing'er won't explain it to my husband. I'll leave you with some suspense. Then what's this sword called? You can at least tell me. Guhan took a step back and asked for the next best thing. That's not a problem. Actually, my husband, you already know her. Her name is Juicy Sword, Yi Qing said with a smile. Juicy Sword, it's actually her. Ji Yuhan came to a sudden realization. No wonder Yi Qing said that he knew about her long ago. In Sword Maiden Online, Ji Yuhan had already collected a total of 9 Juicy Sword's mechanical birds and placed them in his pocket. No, since the game already had a keepsake of Juicy Sword, didn't that mean that humans already knew about Juicy Sword? How could it be a new and undiscovered Sword Maiden? But on second thought, Guhan immediately reacted. Since Zhe Tianjiandi was able to leave a foreshadowing of the hero's begin at the end instance dungeon, then leaving a keepsake of Juicy Sword didn't seem to be a big deal. After all, Juicy Sword was hidden here by Zhe Tianjiandi. Zhe Tianjiandi must have a deep understanding of Juicy Sword. My husband, please hide this Juicy Sword well. This is a famed sword maiden that Qing'er specially prepared for you. Qing'er knows that it's impossible for you to obtain the 3-foot sword, so she prepared Juicy Sword here for you. She's still a child who has never had a master before. Please treat her well, my husband. Yi Qing specially reminded him. This is the famed sword maiden that you prepared for me. When Guhan heard Yi Qing's words, he was stunned. Then, he put down Juicy Sword and shook his head helplessly. Although Juicy Sword might be comparable to the 3-foot sword as you said, I've already promised someone that my famed sword maiden will only be her and no other sword maiden. Guhan couldn't help but think of Queen Yu, who was still in the game. He had been separated from her for about 20 days. He didn't know if she would go crazy thinking about him. She was the only one in the huge house. Qing Pin and Yi Tian had already returned to reality. She lived there alone and had no friends to talk to. She must be very lonely. Guhan promised Queen Yu that once he became a famed sword maiden in reality, he would immediately go to Yangjing City to coordinate with her. Guhan definitely wouldn't go back on his word. Husband, the person you're talking about is Queen Yu. Yi Qing directly saw through Ji Yuhan's thoughts. Husband, don't worry. Qing'er won't do anything to let the Queen of Yu down. After all, the Queen of Yu saved Qing'er's life. Qing'er has never forgotten the Queen of Yu's kindness. However, the King of Yu doesn't affect you having Lady Juicy. Don't tell me that you don't have Lady Yu Chang and Lady Etian at the same time. That was only possible because of the Sword Maiden grafting spell. However, I've already used the Sword Maiden grafting spell on Duyu. This sorcery can only be used once. Ji Yuhan explained. Wrong husband. Qing'er knows a thing or two about the Sword Maiden grafting technique. The reason why this technique can only be used once is because this Sword Maiden can't leave a mark on husband's body, so it can only be used once. But now, Lady Yu Chang has left her sword mark in your purple palace. In fact, it's no different from a normal Sword Maiden. You can still use the Sword Maiden grafting technique again. Hearing Yi Qing's words, Guhan's heart was suddenly filled with anger. He glared at Yi Qing angrily. If you want me to use the Sword Maiden grafting technique again to steal someone else's Sword Maiden, I advise you to give up on that idea. I, Guhan, can give up many things for the sake of revenge and to defeat Yuan Ku. However, I will never give up on the most basic principles of being a human. Humans must not kill each other, and even more so, we must not use such heinous methods to increase our own strength. Don't be angry, husband. Please let Qing'er finish. Yi Qing pressed down on Guhan's shoulder and leaned her head against Guhan's chest. Qing'er naturally understands husband's thoughts. If husband was that kind of heartless scoundrel, Qing'er wouldn't like husband. But husband, there are some things that can't be changed by our will. In the future, you must use the sword maiden grafting technique. No. I won't use it. Guhan firmly shook his head and moved Yi Qing's head away from his chest. Is there only the juicy sword? If there's nothing else, I'm leaving. Forget it. Husband won't listen to anything Qing'er says. When the day comes that day, I hope husband will make the right choice and not let Her Highness live in regret. Yi Qing's words confused Guhan. Just who was she and what did she mean? Husband, don't worry. Qing'er has prepared many things for husband. Husband, please take a look. Yi Qing clapped her hands and another toy car drove out from the opened room. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.